Chapter 902. The military court in Liangzhu. Today's Liangzhu was very different from the past. Although the streets and alleys were as empty as before, a faintly discernible murderous aura lingered in the air, giving people a feeling that the entire Liangzhu had become a death trap. Several newly appointed ministers of the military court were meeting in the Great Hall to discuss the allocation of the new army, as well as how to deal with the ongoing battles and frictions in Diyu, especially how and when to deal with the immortal sects and human kingdoms that had invaded from outer heavenly realms. Just as the discussion was going on, a general clad in soft armor rushed into the Great Hall and handed a jade slip sent through an emergency military teleportation formation to the new military minister of Diyu, Quafu Gong. Quafu Gong took the jade slip and scanned it with his feeble divine sense. A shudder ran through his body, and without hesitation he ran out of the hall. His body had expanded to hundreds of feet tall, and his running speed was indeed as amazing as that of his ancestor when he was chasing the sun. With just a few leaps and bounds, he had reached the imperial palace, and before long he went straight into Yuxiong Palace, where he solemnly handed the jade slip to Emperor Haozuan, who was in the middle of a meeting with the kings of the council. Only a few breaths later than Quafu Gong, the heads of the Directorate of Celestials, the Secret Palace, and the other departments of Diyu had arrived one after another, handing over the same jade slips sent by the East Sea Army through various channels to Emperor Haozuan. The content of the jade slips was very simple, with only one sentence: "The forbidden clans have reappeared, and the king of East Sea has escaped death." The simple sentence made everyone, including Emperor Haozuan, almost jump to their feet, and their scalps went numb. "Somebody, bring out the jade scapegoat puppets that the secret palace has prepared over the years and distribute them to the ministers of the imperial court. All oracles of the secret palace and the Directorate of Celestials are to be on guard against the curses of the forbidden clans. Send 300 jade scapegoat puppets to the East Sea Army and the secret palace. Send someone to deliver the information about the forbidden clans to the king of East Sea." With Emperor Haozuan's order, the tension in the court of Diyu suddenly increased several times. The psychological shadow that the forbidden clans had cast on Great Yu was too strong, and their glorious record of cursing 37 human emperors had made everyone, including Emperor Haozuan, feel their hearts in their mouths. In addition to the jade puppets issued by the secret palace, many of the senior ministers of Diyu, including King Yangshan, had summoned all the oracles around them to be on guard day and night, lest they fall into the trap. The court of Diyu was in a mess, and so was the fight between Wu Qi and the three celestial lords. Lord Xianxing had wounded 7 Killing with the illusion-breaking halberd, and just as he was about to give him another blow, the celestial lord suddenly disappeared. High up in the sky, the star of 7 Killing shone brightly, its silver-purple starlight blanketing the world. 7 Killing's aura had fused with the starlight, and even Wu Qi's divine sense could not detect where his true form was. All of a sudden, a figure appeared next to Lord Xianxing. With a sway of his body and a swing of the illusion-breaking halberd, he disappeared as well. In the blink of an eye, with the power of the halberd, Lord Xianxing flickered in and out of existence in the void, leaving thousands of afterimages behind. But no matter how he moved, there was always a faint silver-purple figure following closely behind him. Off to the side, Celestial Lord Greed, who was battered by the thunderbolts, suddenly let out a long howl that shook Lord Xianxing and caused him to tremble. The circulation of his magic power came to an abrupt halt, and his figure reappeared amidst the starlight. A purple-green figure emerged beside him and punched him in the back of the heart. The force of the punch was like a thunderbolt. Lord Xianxing gave a muffled grunt as the flesh and bone on his back burst open, and a fist almost entirely made of starlight pierced through his chest. Lord Xianxing cried out miserably as he swung the halberd in his hand and disappeared once again. Princess Zhang grabbed at the void and pulled Lord Xianxing's body out of the starlight. A vast amount of green mist rolled up from the surrounding woods, quickly turning into drops of green spirit liquid and pouring into Lord Xianxing's body. With a large hole in his chest, Lord Xianxing's fleshly body squirmed rapidly as new flesh grew to seal the huge wound. But the new fleshly body was fragile and far less strong than before. Seeing that Lord Xiansheng, who could constantly break the void with the illusion-breaking halberd, was seriously injured by 7 killing with just one punch, Wu Qi let out a long roar. 108 Kunwu swords shot out in a beam of light and quickly formed the fiend-slaying sword formation. The surrounding mountains and earth were shaking violently, and the space within a radius of 100,000 miles twisted in a strange way. Like illusions, the mountains and hills were slowly twisting and rolling up, tightly wrapping up this part of the space. The energy of earth, water, fire, and wind, as well as the innate and acquired energies of 5 elements, gathered together and turned into a misty void under the control of the Kunwu swords, merging with the twisting mountains and hills. High up in the sky, the 3 stars of Kill, Vanquisher, and Wolf were flashing with dazzling starlight. They seemed to have pressed down on Pangu continent. As far as the eye could see, they were the only stars in the sky today, while the sun, the moon, and the stars had all disappeared. A great sheet of green light flickered over the fiend-slaying sword formation as the starlight from the 3 stars fell straight down in 3 beams of light, causing the sword formation to rumble. But no matter how hard they tried, they could not penetrate into the sword formation. The thunderbolts attracted by Lei Meng had stopped. Vanquisher and Greed grunted and scurried back to 7 Killing's side. 7 Killing's back was struck by the illusion-breaking halberd, and a strip of muscle about 3 fingers wide and a foot long had vanished into thin air. Silver-purple bones and squirming internal organs could be seen in the wound. But compared to Star-Lord Destruction and Star-Lord Greed, Star-Lord 7 Killing's injuries were nothing. Celestial Lord Vanquisher and Celestial Lord Covetous Wolf had to rely on the boundless star power of their natal stars to escape from the thunder tribulation. Their armors were blown to smithereens, and their exquisite and luxurious battle robes were burned into wisps of smoke. The fair skin of the 2 celestial lords was now burnt to a crisp, and their strong muscles were covered with cracks that looked like the mouths of children. Some of the wounds were more than a foot long and so deep that the bones could be seen. Silver-purple blood with a faint fragrance was flowing out of the wounds. The fiend-slaying sword formation had sealed off the surrounding void. At this moment, the world was in chaos, and no starlight could be seen in all directions. Wu Qi's body was trembling slightly. The 3 stars in the outside world were madly pouring their natal star power to bombard the sword formation, trying to shatter it and get in touch with the 3 celestial lords. The 3 celestial lords, on the other hand, looked at Wu Qi cautiously. They were breathing heavily, but there was no air, no natural energy, and no starlight in the surroundings, only the rich Pangu's sacred energy. For human warriors, Pangu's sacred energy was the source of power and life. With it, human warriors could almost be perpetual motion machines that could fight forever as long as their heads were not cut off. But for immortals and celestial lords, Pangu's sacred energy was undoubtedly a deadly poison. It would automatically corrode and devour their immortal energy, and eventually erase all their magic power and cultivation base. 7 Killings stared at Wu Qi with a slightly sullen look and said, "I didn't expect that a mere king of East Sea could push us to this extent." Vanquisher nodded and said, "We were too careless. We haven't made a move for dozens of periods. I thought it would be a piece of cake, but I didn't expect that we would be seriously wounded by you villains. This is the fiend-slaying sword formation, isn't it? I've finally seen it today." Celestial Lord Greed looked around with a frown and said in a heavy voice, "I can't believe this sword formation can isolate the star power. Obviously, the King of East Sea has discovered our weakness. Without the support of natal star power, our cultivation base is actually very weak. When we were conferred the title of Celestial Lords, we were only 18th tier gold immortals. We've served 7 great celestial emperors, but now we're only 3rd tier gold immortals." With a deep sigh, Greed spread out his hands and said with a smile, "Why don't we just call it a day? Without the support of natal star power, we're no match for the King of East Sea. But, will the King of East Sea really dare to kill us? Our destinies are connected to the stars, and we are actually part of the heavenly Tao. If he kills us, he will kill the heavenly Tao and suffer the wrath of heaven." Wu Qi looked coldly at the 3 celestial lords. Slowly, he took out large pieces of materials from his sleeve, produced the heaven refining cauldron, and began to melt them one by one. Before long, Wu Qi had crafted 3 palm-sized figurines. He bit his fingertip and slowly began to draw ancient runes and incantations on the figurines. The 3 celestial lords' faces fell. Looking at the figurines in Wu Qi's hand, Greed sneered and said, "Is the king of East Sea really going to risk his life?" Wu Qi said slowly, "In ancient times, before the great Saint Pangu created this world, there were ancient stars that matched the destinies of chaos fiend gods, and they became celestial lords. Ancient stars contain the laws of the great Tao, and if you kill a celestial lord, you will suffer a backlash from the laws of the great Tao. It's an arduous and unrewarding task." With a strange laugh, Wu Qi narrowed his eyes at the 3 pale-faced celestial lords, then nodded and said, "You should have heard of the name Pangio Fiend, haven't you? He was the one who invented a way to kill a celestial lord without suffering a backlash from his natal star. It's nothing more than a way to substitute one's form for one's destiny, but it's very effective." Vanquisher snapped. Pangio Fiend was killed by the joint efforts of the ancient celestial lords less than 1 eon after Pangu created the world. Wu Qi nodded and said, "His method has been passed down, and many people have learned it. Haha, after all, even though you celestial lords are just mortals, you can become almighty experts as long as you match the destinies of your stars. Who doesn't have some tricks up their sleeves to deal with you?" The heaven refining cauldron slowly flew up and sank into the fiend's slaying sword formation. Wu Qi shook the little statue in his hand and said in a deep voice, "Today, I'd like to see what it feels like to kill a celestial lord. Legend has it that there is a spirit pill called Dazzling Star Pill, which has the miraculous effect of making one ascend to immortality. I'm not very talented, so I'd like to use your bones to make a cauldron of this pill." The heaven refining cauldron was hidden in the sword formation, its mouth aimed at the 3 pillars of star power that were falling whistling down from the sky, devouring all of them. Inside the formation, Wu Qi pointed a finger out. Countless mountains and rivers appeared in the void, piling up together and blocking everyone's sight and divine sense. Clouds and smoke rose from the formation, and the 3 celestial lords felt their bodies lightened as they were suddenly teleported to 3 different places. With a whistle, Wu Qi led Ao Buzan and the others toward Greed, who was the most seriously injured. Chapter 903. Inside the fiend-slaying sword formation, more than 1,000 mountains, each hundreds of miles across, smashed toward Greed in a row. Greed was a cunning man. Of the 3 stars, he was the most resourceful, but his fighting strength was the weakest. Wu Qi's first target was Greed. He was the easiest one to deal with, especially since he was the most seriously injured. In laying out the formation today, Wu Qi had fused the mountains, rivers, and earth veins within 100,000 miles into it. Now, he was using the energy of the earth veins to condense mountains to attack the enemy, which was indeed very powerful. Greed kept waving the strange-shaped fan at the mountains that were smashing down on him. Black winds turned into countless wolves and smashed the mountains to pieces. The first 100 mountains were easy for him. The next 100 mountains were not strenuous for him. But when the third wave of mountains smashed down with monstrous flames or icy winds, Greed's face turned a little unsightly. The formation here isolated the power of the stars, and the surroundings were filled with rich Pangu sacred energy. Not only could Greed not get any replenishment from the power of the stars, but his magic power was constantly being depleted by Pangu's sacred energy. The soaring silver-purple starlight around him gradually dimmed, and the tremendous power that was enough to destroy everything gradually disappeared from his body. The mountains that he could have easily smashed just a moment ago were now shaking him. Alarmed, Greed kept chanting mantras and constantly mobilizing the Greed star to send down its natal star power. Outside the formation, the Greed star shone so brightly that it almost pressed down on the surface of Pangu continent. Only one star could be seen swirling in the vast sky, spewing out a huge beam of light that blotted out the sky. But as soon as the beam of light approached the formation, it disappeared without a trace, and Heaven Refining Cauldron happily swallowed all the star power. The heaven refining cauldron was a primordial treasure's spiritual item. Although it did not have any powerful offensive or defensive means, it could refine everything in the universe. It could refine innate and acquired energy at will. To the heaven refining cauldron, the power of the stars was a raw material for refining artifacts. Now that the array had isolated Star Lord Covetous Wolf's control over the Covetous Wolf's star power, the heaven refining cauldron could easily store all the star power inside. The heaven refining cauldron devoured the ravenous wolf star's power, leaving nothing behind. Star-Lord Ravenous Wolf felt even more distressed. His cultivation base was only at the level of a gold immortal, and all his power came from the boundless and immense star power of the greedy wolf star. In the past, he used the star power to walk the path of pure brute force, and there was almost no treasure in the world that he could not smash and no array that he could not break. But today, he ran into Wu Qi, a freak. Wu Qi had the kaleidoscopic star core and 108,000 great daos of the ancient stars in his interstitial world. Naturally, he was also an expert in manipulating star power. In addition, he had the heaven refining cauldron devouring treasures and the fiend slaying sword formation isolating the void. The star power in his body was constantly being consumed, but there was no way to replenish it. After cleaving away more than 1,300 mountains, Greed finally revealed a terrified expression. While roaring an incantation to control his natal star, Greed began to flee in a wretched manner within the formation. But the formation was under the control of Wu Qi alone, and the space and time in it changed according to Wu Qi's will. No matter how hard he tried, he could never get out of Wu Qi's sight. He was always flying and teleporting within hundreds of miles around Wu Qi. Xiang Yu, who was hiding behind a lofty mountain, leaped up. The banner of Qiu transformed into a boundless sea of blood and wrapped around Greed, slowing him down for a full 3 seconds. 3 seconds was enough for Xiang Yu to thrust his spear thousands of times. The primordial artifact he had taken from Huamu's celestial lord and named the Blood Flood Dragon Spear, pierced toward Greed with countless beams of blood-red light. Greed cursed hoarsely as he waved his long, oddly shaped fan in a panic to block Xiang Yu's spear attacks. Xiang Yu's strength was so great that every time the spear struck the fan, Greed's body would tremble, and the starlight covering his body would dim. When the last 13 spear strikes came, Greed's wrist went numb, and the fan was knocked away by the Blood Flood Dragon Spear. Xiang Yu then stabbed him 13 times in a row. As the spear pierced into his body, the celestial lord howled miserably in pain, while 13 large holes were left in his body. The last wisp of star power in his body exploded as he transformed into a giant wolf, about 100 feet long and with a pair of silver wings on his back. He shattered the shackles of the banner of Qiyu, then transformed into a beam of silver light and fled into the sky. He opened his mouth and shot a silver thunderbolt at Kunwu sword, one of the 108 formation eyes of the fiend slaying sword formation, hoping to break a crack in the formation. As long as there was a crack, the boundless power of the stars would be able to fuse with him, and he would immediately be able to return to his original strongest state. 4 pieces of broken dragon bodies flashed past him, each with a claw holding a blurry halberd. Purple light tore through the void, and a few hideous wounds appeared on Greed's body for no reason. Blood sprayed out of the wounds, and he howled in pain as his flying upward came to an abrupt halt. Lord Xianxing appeared in the void, panting. The round of attacks just now had almost drained the last bit of energy in him, and he had not yet recovered from the heavy blow just now. He had risked his life to come up and give Greed such a powerful blow. A spear came plunging straight down from the sky. Ao Buzan screamed as he swung the soul-splitting spear down at the wolf's head. The celestial lord shuddered when the spear's shaft smashed solidly on the wolf's head. His immortal soul was struck by a tremendous force, flickering violently like an oil lamp in a storm, and he was almost killed. Fortunately, the souls of celestial lords were protected by a powerful star formation. Although Greed's immortal soul was almost disintegrated by the soul-splitting spear, he was still lucky enough to survive under the protection of the formation. But his immortal soul was greatly shaken, and at the moment he had turned into an idiot. Groaning, he fell to the ground, unable to move, and when he returned to his human form, he rolled his eyes and fainted. Yuan Qing appeared next to Greed with a sneer. He swung his staff and smashed the celestial lord's body, shattering all his limbs and joints. Then, as if by accident, he smashed the celestial lord's lower body, smashing everything below the pelvis into minced meat. Gnashing his teeth, Yuan Qing stamped on Greed's head a few times in a row and said, "How dare you break Master Monkey's stick? You broke Master Monkey's iron staff, so Master Monkey will break your meat staff." Wu Qi rolled his eyes and pretended not to hear Yuan Qing's words. The once simple and honest little demon Yuan Qing was no longer there. Anyone who had been influenced by Audiobook for too long would become like this, and Wu Qi was no longer surprised. Princess Zhangli glared at Yuan Qing, who was so frightened that he hurriedly hugged his staff and hid behind Wu Qi. Princess Zhangli looked coldly at Greed, who was beaten beyond recognition. Then, she took out 19 long, black needles with only a hint of blood on their tips and stabbed them into Greed's body. These needles were not aimed at acupoints or blood vessels, but at an ancient saying recorded in the secret palace, essence chakras. 19 long needles controlled 19 essence chakras. No matter how powerful one would be a cripple once all the source of essence in one's body was controlled. Gold horn and silver horn flew over with gold feather and silver feather. "Can we start eating now?" Gold horn asked straightforwardly. Wu Qi shook his head. Pointing at 2 flashing stars in the distance, he sneered and said, "There are 2 more. Let's take care of them together." Frowning, Wu Qi kicked Greed and said with a long sigh, "He is only a 3rd-tier gold immortal, so there is nothing to eat." Silverhorn stared at Wu Qi with wide eyes, twitched his mouth, and said proudly, "We're not just eating food now, we're also eating taste. Well, he is, after all, a celestial lord of the celestial court. His reputation alone is enough for us to eat. As for the fact that he is too thin and tasteless, that is secondary." Wu Qi gave Princess Zhangli a perplexed look. "Well, what kind of demons, devils, and ghosts have I raised? You can eat people, but you don't have to eat taste? When you and your brother were eating grass in that ancient immortal's cave abode, you didn't pay so much attention to it, did you? Who taught them this?" His eyes flashed, and in the blink of an eye, the formation changed again. Wu Qi ordered his men to swarm forward. With the great power of the fiend-slaying sword formation, they captured 7 killing and vanquisher alive, just like Greed. Without hesitation, Yuan Qing smashed the celestial lords of 7 killing and vanquishers' limbs and lower bodies, and Princess Zhangli imprisoned them in the same way. Although the 3 celestial lords had lost the support of their natal stars, the remaining star power in their bodies was not weak. It took Wu Qi and his men 2 days and 2 nights to subdue them with the power of the formation. If Wu Qi did not have the heaven-refining cauldron, a supreme artifact of primal that could devour star power, the fiend-slaying sword formation alone would not have been able to completely isolate them from the attack of star power. After recalling the Kunwu swords and dispersing the formation, Wu Qi was about to regroup the army and return to the East Sea when a dragon roar suddenly rang out from the sky, followed by a familiar voice. "King of East Sea, please stay. I, Liu Bang, am honored to meet you." Hearing Liu Bang's voice, Xiang Yu quietly blended into the army of the East Sea without looking up. The army of the East Sea consisted of millions of soldiers, and Liu Bang, who was cautious and focused all his attention on Wu Qi, did not notice that his mortal enemy was in the army of the East Sea. Surrounded by more than 10,000 celestial soldiers and generals, accompanied by 2 celestial lords in luxurious robes, Liu Bang cupped his fist at Wu Qi and said with a smile, King of East Sea, I bring you good news." Wu Qi did not say a word, but Audiobook said with great familiarity, "What good news? Are you going to marry your daughter and granddaughter to me?" Liu Bang's face froze. Pretending not to hear Audiobook, he just smiled dryly at Wu Qi and said, "The great celestial emperor has decreed that the conflict between the 3 celestial lords and the king of East Sea just now was just a misunderstanding. As long as the king of East Sea returns the 3 celestial lords, the celestial court will never take the initiative to cause trouble to the East Sea again." After pondering for a moment, Lu Bang smiled and said, "We'll also write off the matter of the crown prince and pretend that it never happened. What do you think, King of East Sea?" Wu Qi gave the three celestial lords, who were tied up and unconscious, a surprised look on his face. After a long while, he nodded and said, "The great celestial emperor wants to make peace? The celestial court wants to make peace? But you can't just make empty promises without any benefits. These three have killed tens of millions of soldiers of the East Sea, and the compensation is a huge figure." Lu Bang's face twisted. Why did it sound like he was going against his conscience? Chapter 904. In the eternal light of the 33 heavens, 6 celestial emperors sat steadily amidst the purple mist. The Big Dipper Emperor's face was a little unsightly. His thin lips were pursed like blades, and the corners of his mouth were curved like iron hooks, emanating a terrifying chill. A 3-foot-long purple jade rui scepter was placed across his knees. He gently tapped it with his fingers and said indifferently, "What a disgrace! Those baldies are watching from the void. Killing, Vanquisher, and Wolf are the 3 most famous celestial lords of the celestial court. Now that they've suffered a crushing defeat today, those baldies may come to visit us tomorrow and find some inexplicable reason to celebrate." Ziwei Lingying narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, "So, we're just asking for peace. It's fine if we lose, but if we're really killed, it will take at least 3 periods for the 3 celestial lords to fuse with the natal star power of killing Vanquisher and Wolf. Where do we have that time now?" With a cold smile, Ziwei Lingying turned to the central celestial emperor, who was sitting beside him, and asked, "Brother, did you see how they isolated the natal star power of killing Vanquisher and Wolf? It's true that the fiend-slaying sword formation can seal the void, but its foundation was passed down by several Daozu, so it can't isolate the star power." The central celestial emperor, who had 3 dark yellow pupils spinning in his eyes, squinted at the lower realm for a long time. At last, he shook his head and said, "I can't see through it. The fiend-slaying sword formation itself is difficult to see through, and the King of East Sea seems to have added some other mysteries to it." After calculating with his fingers for a while, the central celestial emperor grinned coldly and said, "The natal star power of killing Vanquisher and Wolf has been damaged by 20%, and it will take them a lot of effort to recover. Something in the formation has devoured the natal star power of killing Vanquisher and Wolf. It's devouring, not consuming. Interesting. What kind of extraordinary treasure can have such power?" The 6 celestial emperors looked at each other, then bowed their heads and pondered for a moment. Ziwei Lingying nodded and said with a smile, "That's good. It's best to find out the problem in advance. Today, the 3 celestial lords who killed the broken wolf celestial lords are meritorious and not at fault. If in the future, when the celestial lords of the celestial court clash with Yu and are also cut off by the formation set by the King of East Sea, won't we be at the mercy of others?" The Scarlet Emperor, the Emperor of the South Dipper, said indifferently, "If the celestial court were to go all out, then we would have to kill the King of East Sea first, or find out the reason why he can completely isolate the star power. Otherwise, the army of the celestial court would not be able to go all out due to our means, and those baldies would definitely take advantage of us." Great Celestial Emperor Ziwei Lingying gave a mysterious smile and said in a low voice, "Benefited? That might not be the case. Daozu has his own ideas. We just need to be cautious." He took a deep breath, gritted his teeth, and said, "If this plan works, we will be able to enjoy the boundless fortune of immortals and suppress the celestial court of the 33 heavens forever. We will no longer have to worry about the Great Tribulation." Hearing that, the celestial emperors of the 5 directions and Chi-Chi took a deep breath at the same time, and their faces flushed with excitement. The Emperor of the South Dipper nodded and sent a beam of light down to the lower realm. "That's good," he said with a low laugh. "We don't have to worry about our reputation. We just need to exchange for the 3 celestial lords who killed the broken wolf celestial lord." In front of the army of the East Sea, Lu Bang was bargaining with Wu Qi, while Wu Qi was standing at the prow, pointing at Lu Bang and demanding an exorbitant price. One was demanding an exorbitant price, while the other was bargaining back. They were like two street vendors in a vegetable market, quarreling over the price of 2 taels of garlic. But what they were asking for was much more valuable than 2 taels of garlic. Wu Qi insisted that the 3 celestial lords had killed more than 12 million soldiers in the East Sea, and that the celestial court should compensate the 12 million soldiers in the East Sea, their training fees, and other miscellaneous expenses. Liu Bang, on the other hand, was gesticulating and cursing. He angrily refuted Wu Qi's claim that more than 12 million soldiers were killed in the East Sea. He used his personality and moral character to guarantee that the 3 celestial lords were firm pacifists and that they had, at most, accidentally injured 300 to 500 soldiers in the East Sea. The so-called killing of more than 10 million soldiers in the East Sea was just Wu Qi's bullshit, and he was deliberately blackmailing the celestial court. The 3 celestial lords were hung on the prow of Wu Qi's warship, with Huang Liang guarding them with a shining machete. As long as Wu Qi gave the order, he would chop off their heads and kick them like balls. Every time Wu Qi spoke fiercely, Huang Liang would rub the blade on the necks of the 3 celestial lords. Every time Liu Bang spoke a little harsher, Huang Liang would simply make a few small cuts on the faces of the 3 celestial lords, letting the blood drip down their chins. Seeing Huang Liang's action, the faces of the 2 celestial lords next to Liu Bang darkened. The celestial lords of the celestial court were divided into countless forces, big and small, but they were a whole. The 84,000 celestial lords were an inseparable whole, and they were also the most powerful force in the court of the celestial court. As the 3 most famous celestial lords of the celestial court, it would not be a good thing for the other celestial lords if they died here today. Seeing Liu Bang and Wu Qi haggling over the compensation, the 2 celestial lords were surrounded by flames and cold air. They wished they could slap Liu Bang to death, kill Wu Qi, and snatch the 3 celestial lords back. Unfortunately, Wu Qi's army was also strong. On the surface, there were more than a dozen primordial experts among them, and the fate of the 3 celestial lords was right in front of them. Although the 2 celestial lords were furious, they did not dare to attack recklessly. Just as Liu Bang was swearing in the name of the ancestor of his father, the South Emperor, Crimson Emperor, a beam of light shot down from the sky into the top of Liu Bang's head. Liu Bang's body froze, and a gleam flickered in his eyes. He squinted at Wu Qi for a while, then said coolly, "Well, just tell me how much compensation you want. The 3 celestial lords must be sent back to the celestial court, or the celestial court will not hesitate to go all out and wipe out your East Sea army." As Liu Bang spoke, the stars in the sky burst into dazzling flames. The natal stars of the Southern Dipper, the Big Dipper, the Azure Dragon in the east, the White Tiger in the west, the 28 Mansions, the 12 Yuanshan, the Heavenly Dipper, the Earthly Fiends, and even the 360 minor celestial mansions all shone with a blinding light at the same time. A great pressure came pressing down from the sky, forcing some of the lower-grade flying ships in Wu Qi's army to plunge to the ground with a deep rumble. Their decks were twisted and broken, and black smoke and flames were spewing out of many places. Wu Qi's face darkened. He grabbed the sword of a Dong High general next to him and gave it a slash. The sword gleamed coldly, and blood splattered everywhere. The celestial lord's left arm was severed by the slash. His eyes went wide with pain, and his body twitched violently. But as all his chakras were sealed, he could not even let out a scream. Pointing the bloody sword at Liu Bang, whose face had turned stiff, Wu Qi sneered and said, "Which celestial emperor of the celestial court is here? The celestial court has destroyed 600 flying ships of my East Sea army, and we have to settle this score. Tell those celestial lords to restrain their aura, or don't blame me for killing all 3 of you." The corner of Liu Bang's mouth twitched. He glanced at the dozens of flying ships of the East Sea, which were falling and spewing smoke, and said through gritted teeth, 600 flying ships? Wu Qi sneered, pointed the tip of the sword at Vanquisher's forehead, and said lazily, "If your majesty thinks 600 is too little, we can give you 6,000. The South Emperor, who had attached a wisp of his consciousness to Liu Bang, was rendered speechless by Wu Qi's shamelessness for a long time. After a long while, the South Emperor said in a deep voice, "That's it. If the king of East Sea agrees, we'll return the 3 celestial lords. In the future, the celestial court will never take the initiative to provoke the provinces under the jurisdiction of the East Sea. If the king of East Sea doesn't agree, the celestial court won't hesitate to fight today. Opening his mouth, a beam of light shot out from Lu Bang's mouth. Wrapped in the light was a golden bracelet with 9 dragons coiled around it. In each dragon's mouth was a golden pearl, and inside the pearl was a huge storage space. At the moment, the storage space was filled with all kinds of spirit stones, immortal stones, and materials for artifact and alchemy, enough to arm millions of new soldiers of the East Sea. Weighing the bracelet in his hand in surprise, Wu Qi asked with a smile, "Are the 3 celestial lords so important to the celestial court?" "The celestial court will never abandon any of its subjects," said the South Emperor seriously. Wu Qi grinned. The South Emperor's words were against his will, and so was Wu Qi. They looked at each other, then turned their heads away at the same time, almost spitting on the ground to show their disdain. With a cold snort, Wu Qi grabbed the 3 seriously injured celestial lords and threw them away. A beam of light shot out from between Lu Bang's eyebrows, turning into a bright light that wrapped around the 3 celestial lords and was about to fly up into the sky. At this moment, a fragrant wind blew by, and a vast and boundless light of Buddha descended from the sky. The fragrance of sandalwood permeated the air. A bodhisattva, radiating a warm and clear light, sat on a lotus platform. He put his palms together with a smile and said, "South Dipper Emperor, I have a life-prolonging pill, the sandalwood pill. The 3 celestial lords are severely injured. If there is a need, I will not be stingy with a few pills." From the light came the South Emperor's cold laugh. "Master Medicine Bodhisattva, thank you so much. The celestial court has no shortage of elixirs." With a sudden swoosh, the light wrapped around the 3 seriously injured celestial lords and disappeared into the sky in a flash. The 2 celestial lords of Yin and Yang then turned into 2 balls of light, one red and one white, and flew up into the sky, returning to the outer region. Smiling, Bodhisattva Apothecary King gave Wu Qi a glance and laughed. Then, another sheet of Buddhist light soared into the sky, and his tall golden body slowly disappeared amidst it. Fiddling with the storage bracelet in his hand, he glanced at Lu Bang, who was hovering in midair, and said with a cold grin, "Why are you still here, King of Han? Don't tell me you want to visit Dong Hai." "Well, there is no good wine or meat, but there must be a lot of torture. Are you interested?" Lu Bang sneered resentfully. He looked at the sky with flickering eyes, then glanced at Wu Qi coldly, and glanced sideways at Princess Zhonglu. He snorted coldly and clapped his hands. A large group of heavenly soldiers surrounded him and quickly flew to the east. Wu Qi snorted coldly, gathered the army, and regrouped. Then, he quickly retreated to the East Sea. Not long after they moved forward, the void in front of them suddenly collapsed, and 7 supreme towers emerged out of thin air. An old oracle, who was no different from a skeleton, sat feebly on the supreme tower in the middle and cried out, "Is the king of East Sea here? I'm here to bring you something on his majesty's order." Wu Qi was stunned, and hurriedly went up to him with Princess Zhonglu. Chapter 905. The supreme oracle sent by Emperor Haozuan to deliver the puppet to Wu Qi was Long Mo, the grand oracle of the Directorate of Celestials who served under the former emperors 77 generations ago. He had just woken up from the Temple of Revered Elders, a powerful oracle who had volunteered to enter the Temple of Revered Elders to hibernate and become one of the trump cards of Diyu. The surname Long had a special meaning in Diyu. There were many people with the surname Long in Diyu, but in the imperial court of Diyu, the people with the surname Long were divided into 13 branches, each of which was a hybrid of human and dragons. They were collectively known as the 13 descendants of the dragon bloodline, and were the reclusive clans of Diyu. The so-called reclusive clans were those who rarely showed up in public in Diyu, but lived in the dark of Diyu and performed all kinds of secret duties for Diyu. For example, the 13 descendants of the dragon bloodline were the Jiao dragons of Diyu. All the mounts and beast souls of Diyu's flood dragons were provided by the dragons they raised. And it was said that until now, many of the members of the 13 descendants of the dragon bloodline had intermarried with dragons who had cultivated into human forms, giving birth to many half-dragons with a very strong bloodline of dragons, who possessed unique innate divine abilities that were very different from dragons and humans. Long Mo was a half-dragon with a very strong bloodline of dragons. On his forehead were two horny protrusions the size of a baby's fist, emanating a faint aura of dragons. Clearly, they were immature dragon horns. His pupils were also the majestic, cold, and merciless golden pupils of dragons. Occasionally, when they came into contact with strong light, they would turn from round to strange oval shapes. There were even a few tiny blue dragon scales growing on the back of his hand, all of which represented his unique bloodline. Long Mo had a lofty status in the secret palace's revered temple. Because of his unique Dragonman bloodline, the secret techniques and poisons Buddha's soul had set up in the revered temple could not hurt him. Therefore, after both the used Directorate of Celestials and the secret palace suffered heavy losses, Emperor Haozuan, who was in desperate need of manpower, had awakened a group of revered elders from the 13 clans of dragon bloodline led by Long Mo and asked them to fill in the gaps between the secret palace and Directorate of Celestials. Because the lifespan of these revered elders was almost depleted, Emperor Haozuan had obtained a batch of Langxian jade, a specialty of Mount Kunlun, and shared it with the awakened revered elders, adding nearly 1,000 years of life to each of them. This more or less alleviated the problem of the shortage of high-end forces in Diyu. Sitting in the main hall of Wu Qi's ship, Long Mo kept glancing at Xiang Ao, intentionally or unintentionally. Lord Xianxing and Catfish were both powerful demon immortals who had cultivated from flood dragons, and Long Mo was very familiar with their auras. He had seen many powerful dragons, so he was not too interested in them. But Ao Buzan always gave Long Mo a strange feeling, a feeling that he was superior and inviolable, just like the feeling he had when he was young and met the patriarch of his bloodline, trembling with fear and yet admiring him at the same time. He twitched his mouth and told himself that it was just an illusion. Ao Buzan was sitting there carelessly, twisting his body from time to time as if he was having convulsions. No matter how he looked at him, he looked like a little demon who had just taken shape. He did not have the dignified, solemn, and inviolable dignity of the elders of dragons. After giving Ao Buzan a deep look, Long Mo fished out 300 palm-sized puppets made of jade from under his sleeve and handed them to Wu Qi one by one. The King of East Sea has distributed these puppets to the important generals and civil officials of the East Sea, he said in a deep voice. They are the magical treasures that the secret palace has made at great cost over the years, and each of them can withstand 9 curses from ordinary members of the forbidden clans. If their elders make a move, each death scapegoat puppet will be able to withstand one of their all-out curses. Upon hearing Long Mo's words, Wu Qi hurriedly distributed the puppets to the people in the hall, especially to Princess Zhonglu, who was forced by Wu Qi to take 3 puppets each. After each person dripped a drop of blood on the puppet would develop a telepathic connection with the person. If someone cursed them, the puppet would bear the full power of the curse in their place. These puppets were only a small part of all the resources Long Mo had brought with him. He had also brought a lot of information about the forbidden clans, as well as the spells, techniques, and ways to deal with the forbidden magic that they often used. There were a total of 124 jade slips the size of a palm, in which were recorded a lot of things related to the forbidden clans. Princess Zhonglu took the jade slips. With them, at least the people of the East Sea would not be ignorant about the forbidden clans. As long as Princess Zhonglu could figure out the various spells recorded in them, the Directorate of Celestials of the East Sea would be able to come up with various ways to deal with the forbidden clans, and they would no longer be plotted against by others. Originally, Long Mo was going to return to Liangzhu after giving these things to Wu Qi. But, because of the extremely strange aura emanating from Ao Buzan, he took the initiative to stay and explain to Wu Qi the reason why the Forbidden Clan spells were so powerful. Wu Qi, Princess Zhonglu, and the others listened with great interest as Long Mo told them all kinds of secrets that they had never heard before. In fact, The Forbidden Clans and the 13 descendants of the dragon bloodline were essentially mixed blood of humans and other races. But the 13 descendants of the dragon bloodline were mixed blood with dragons, and when the ancient great saints created humans, they had incorporated the bloodline of divine dragons into them. Therefore, humans could also be regarded as the descendants of dragons, and mixing with the noble dragons was not rejected by the human race. On the contrary, it was a very honorable thing. But the Forbidden Clans did not mix with the bloodline of divine dragons or phoenixes. They communicated with the celestial fiend gods from foreign domains and messed around with some strange things of unknown origin. They only cared about pursuing stronger and stranger powers, and were willing to do anything to achieve it. As a result, all kinds of bizarre mixed-blood descendants emerged one after another, and they even worked hard on the taboo souls. The human race was born with 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls. This was the rule set by the Wahuang clan according to the law of the heavenly Tao when they created humans. Half of the human race's bloodline came from the great Saint Pangu, who had 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls. This was the standard number of souls set by the heavenly Tao for the human race. But in order to become stronger, the Forbidden Clans did not hesitate to tamper with their souls. Strange existences with 7 souls and 1 physical form, 18 souls and 9 physical forms, 1 soul and 13 physical forms were created by them. There were even soul clones of fiend celestials and otherworldly existences in those souls. Some existences from Forbidden Clans had even become clones of otherworldly existences. This made the Forbidden Clans no longer human, which was why they were hunted down by the human race. But the curses of the Forbidden Clans also became stronger and stronger as their bodies and souls mutated. For example, the 5 Forbidden Clansmen captured by Wu Qi were only at the Jin Dan realm. Their bodies were so weak, but their souls were completely different from those of humans. They might have more than a dozen physical souls, some of which belonged to them, while others belonged to extremely powerful existences from foreign domains. These existences were not bound by the laws of the heavenly Tao of this world and could unleash unimaginable lethality. In particular, when several of such formidable existences attacked at the same time, the power of the curse was enough to kill an almighty expert like Wu Qi when he was caught off guard. The Forbidden Race's killing curse wasn't just because of their strange souls. Their killing curse tools were also extraordinary. The refining of all kinds of cursing tools by the Forbidden Clans had surpassed the peak level of the human race. Every seemingly ordinary tool was in fact refined with a great deal of natural treasures and energy. For example, the seemingly ordinary cork statue used to curse Wu Qi was probably the spirit root of some powerful innate divine tree, refined with the blood essence of a large number of powerful living beings, and then injected with magic power by a large number of powerful immortals, Buddhas, or oracles, to curse Wu Qi with the power of all of them. The 5 Forbidden Clansmen, whose cultivation bases were so weak, seemed to have severely wounded Wu Qi, but in fact, their simple curse might have contained the blood essence of hundreds of primordial experts. In that instant, Wu Qi was fighting against hundreds or even more powerful existences. This was the essence of the Forbidden Clan's curses. The bizarre and unpredictable existences from foreign domains, the cursing tools that cost a great deal of effort to refine, and the powerful magic power injected into them by a large number of almighty experts, made the curses of the Forbidden Clans so powerful that they could kill anything that stood in their way. As for the process of cursing, they had to choose the most suitable place, the most suitable time, and the most suitable person to carry out the curse. The considerations of timing, geography, people, and other aspects were even more complicated. In short, the Forbidden Clan's curses were almost artistic, and their various subtleties were beyond the reach of the oracles of the Secret Palace and the Directorate of Celestials Indiyu. After all, the ancient clans, such as Wuxian and Wuping, were the strongest oracle clans when the ancient human race was still in the era of the Tribal Alliance, and the oracles of the Secret Palace and the Directorate of Celestials were their disciples and grand-disciples. Part of the most ancient magic inheritance of the human race was preserved in their clans, and in the face of the endless wonderful magic of the Forbidden Clans, Diyu could only passively defend itself. In terms of magic cultivation base, the current oracles of Yu were indeed no match for the forbidden clans. For so many years, the only way to deal with the forbidden clans was to kill them, and once they found any trace of them, they would immediately use all the forces of the whole state to hunt them down. Because of the heterogeneous bloodline, it was extremely difficult for the forbidden clans to reproduce, and every member of their clan was extremely important. It was already a great achievement for Wu Qi to kill 5 of their clans this time. Wu Qi and Princess Zhang Li humbly asked Long Emo for information about the forbidden clans, and Long Emo told them everything he knew, teaching them everything he knew with the intention of giving guidance to the juniors. Just then, a faint golden flame burst out of Wu Qi's sleeve. Wu Qi was taken aback. He rummaged in his sleeve and pulled out the storage bracelet that the South Emperor had just compensated him with. The 9 golden pearls held in the mouths of the 9 dragons on the storage bracelet were emitting a faint fiery light. The flame rose like smoke and mist, forming a fiery mirror on the surface of the bracelet that was about a foot in radius. Frowning, Wu Qi threw the bracelet out, but it floated in front of him. In the fire mirror, the face of an old man with goat horns on his head and a face like that of an old goat flashed across. The forbidden clans. Long Emo jumped to his feet and cried out. The storage bracelet shattered with a boom, and the scapegoat puppets on Wu Qi and Princess Zhang Li exploded into wisps of smoke. Wu Qi's face turned livid. Chapter 906. The invisible yet clearly sensed evil power swept across the entire hall. Even though Wu Qi and Princess Zhang Li were both Tao-breaking cultivators, they quivered and quivered in fear. That was a power of death and evilness, completely different from the natural powers in Pangu world. In Wu Qi's previous life, Yuan Ling, this evil power only existed in some well-known places of death in the chaos. How evil a creature had to be to possess such a power. Wu Qi finally understood why the forbidden kind were hunted down by the humankind. They had lost all traces of humanity. They were out-and-out freaks, not tolerated by the great Tao of nature of this world. In the small fiery mirror on the bracelet, the old man with a ram's head laughed evilly and said, "Didn't kill you?" Wu Qi gritted his teeth and stared at the fiery mirror. South Emperor, Wu Qi remembered this name. If he didn't know that the power of the celestial court wasn't something he could provoke right now, he would have the impulse to rush into the 33 heavens and skin the South Emperor alive. These emperors of the celestial court were way too cruel. Through this lesson, Wu Qi finally understood one thing. Never believe anything anyone from the celestial court said, not a single word. Princess Zhang Li slowly raised her right hand and gently stroked the fiery mirror with 2 fingers. Wisps of dark mist rose from her fingertips and drew a delicate pattern of heart-rotting grass in the air. Flicking her fingers, the dark heart-rotting grass was set ablaze, transformed into a stream of black smoke, and sprayed on the fiery mirror. The old man's expression turned serious. He murmured in a low voice, then a few strands of twisted wool flew up from his forehead and burned into ashes. A wisp of green smoke swayed in front of his forehead, shielding his forehead. A plume of dark smoke appeared out of nowhere and collided with the green smoke. Princess Zhang Li gave a muffled snort, and a tiny line of blood suddenly split open on her forehead. Meanwhile, the old man with the ram head let out a loud cry as his body was knocked flying backward by an invisible force. After a flurry of tumbling and crawling on the ground, the old man revealed half of his face in the fiery mirror in a flustered and exasperated manner. "Very well, I'll remember all of you." Old Man Ram grinned maliciously. "In the future, don't close your eyes when you sleep. Hee, you will die. Little woman, this old man will remember you." What a brilliant divine technique. Very interesting, this old man will remember you. After a few wild laughs, the fiery mirror transformed into a tiny flame and shot up into the sky, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. The storage bracelet with 9 dragons coiled around it melted slowly like a block of ice, and the storage space inside disintegrated. Not even a single energy stone was left for Wu Qi. Looking at the metal liquid dripping to the ground, Wu Qi suddenly laughed and said, "Good, good, South Emperor. I'll remember what happened today. Just wait and see. His eyes flickered with a bright gleam as he bowed his head and pondered for a moment. Suddenly, his body turned blurry, as if in that very moment his body had undergone a fundamental change, and he had fused with the void. In the blink of an eye, Wu Qi had exerted a great amount of mental energy and divinatory arts to calculate many things. The heaven's secrets had been disturbed. It was like a clear stream suddenly being trampled by thousands of buffaloes. Mud, sand, and stones swirled in the water. The water was filled with countless unpredictable factors, and it was impossible to grasp the operation of the heaven's secrets. However, with the miraculous power of the primordial violet energy, Wu Qi forcibly suppressed a small part of the chaotic heaven's secrets and obtained some interesting information from it. Return to the East Sea and prepare for war. After a brief pause, Wu Qi gritted his teeth and said, "Break up and attack everywhere. We can't let them have an easy time." The Forbidden Clan's sudden curse had caused Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu to lose a puppet each. It was clear that the old man with the ram head was an extremely powerful elder of the Forbidden Clan. Judging from the aura he emitted, this person no longer had the slightest trace of a human. He had completely transformed himself into an alien from the outer realm. Wu Qi now had a little more resentment and fear toward the Celestial Court. Judging from the South Emperor's action, the Celestial Court was a shameless person who would resort to any means to get what they wanted. If he was not careful, he might really be plotted against by the Celestial Court, and that was not a good thing. As for the Forbidden Clan, Emperor Haozuan would deal with them. Wu Qi only needed to keep the important people around him alive, and the Emperor would deal with the rest. Of course, if the Forbidden Clan dared to show their faces in front of Wu Qi did not mind chopping them up and feeding them to the dogs. After sweeping through tens of thousands of provinces in the east, the 7 corps of the East Sea finally returned to the East Sea city. All the prefecture overseers and county governors of the provinces that had been cleaned up by the East Sea Army had been replaced by people with unquestionable loyalty. Of course, more than half of them were loyal to Diyu, and the other half, about 40% of the officials, were devoted to Wu Qi. Many of the officials were simply replaced by the sons of the imperial clans and aristocratic clans of the 6 states, keeping the provinces under tight control. Under Wu Qi's order, all the provinces were preparing for war. The provincial cities must be equipped with more than 200,000 soldiers, and the county cities with more than 30,000 soldiers. As for the subordinate towns and villages, spies must be stationed everywhere. The order Wu Qi gave to the prefecture overseers and county governors was that even if a spirit mouse passed through their land, they must report to him whether the mouse was male or female. All the major departments of the East Sea were operating nervously. The military court trained the new soldiers for the provinces, the Directorate of Celestials assigned oracles to the provinces, and the punishment court planted countless spies around the prefecture overseers and county governors. At the same time, the punishment court had also set up an intelligence network in the provinces. Many of the honest and obedient people of Diyu had been recruited into the punishment court. Wu Qi had a deep understanding of the importance of an intelligence network. Yen Bugui was in charge of the punishment court, and Wu Qi had taught him some of the methods and techniques of the notorious intelligence organizations he knew. Under the joint efforts of Wu Qi and Yen Bugui, the punishment court of the East Sea was gradually transforming. It became more professional, more efficient, and at the same time more cruel and ruthless. All the departments of the East Sea were busy like windmills. With the help of the group of people from the 6 dynasties, the East Sea gradually consolidated the power of the provinces in the east and the provinces around the East Sea, making this territory as solid as an iron bucket. Under the catalysis of Wu Qi and the emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties, Diyu's vast territory, endless population, and infinite resources had undergone a qualitative change, and in a short period of time, it had developed a terrifying combat strength. While Wu Qi was consolidating the provinces in the east, outer heavenly realms were constantly descending from all 4 directions of Pangu continent, reintegrating with the continent. More and more immortal sects and human kingdoms from outer heavenly realms were coming to Pangu continent, triggering countless disputes. The immortal sects from outer heavenly realms were fighting fiercely for an energy vein or a blessed cave abode, and a large number of cultivators and immortals were killed every day. This situation had won the unanimous praise of all the civil and military officials in the imperial court of Diyu. After the human kingdoms that came to Pangu continent had settled down, they immediately began to wage wars in all directions. Countless kingdoms fought and annexed each other, while fake supreme oracles flew all over the sky. On the ground, armies of millions of soldiers were fighting and killing, causing the sky to fall and the earth to crack, and rivers of blood to flow. Judging from the intelligence reports sent from the borders of the eastern provinces, tens of millions of soldiers were killed every day in the eastern region of Diyu, which Wu Qi was in charge of. Some of the weaker kingdoms were wiped out as soon as they came to Pangu continent, and all their people were annexed. Those great kingdoms whose overall strength had been improved had raised the banner of the new emperor of the human race, happily leading their armies to wage wars here and there, crazily plundering people and annexing territories. The whole world was in a foul atmosphere. Wu Qi had a very vivid description of the behavior of these kingdoms. They were breeding goo. These human kingdoms from outer heavenly realms were the original goo, Pangu continent was the goo pot, and the Celestial Court and Buddhist League were the masterminds behind it. They let these kingdoms fight and annex each other, and in the end, they would get a strong human kingdom full of aggression, which they could use to deal with Diyu. Perhaps King Exin Shan and King Li Shan, who had betrayed Diyu, were just goo, and their ending would not be any better. At Wu Qi's order, the elite soldiers of the East Sea formed teams of 30 to 50 men and went deep into the eastern region to stir up trouble. In those human kingdoms where the war was in full swing, there were often incidents of generals being assassinated, princes being beheaded, and emperors disappearing without rhyme or reason. With the addition of the East Sea's army, the kingdoms in the eastern region were thrown into even greater chaos. Sometimes, a kingdom would suddenly collapse and disband into dozens of small powers. The chaos could drive anyone crazy. Wu Qi happily played the role of the mastermind behind the scenes, tormenting the kingdoms in the eastern region. Just as Wu Qi was having a good time, Lao AI sent Wu Qi a piece of information through the intelligence channels of the East Sea that made him very unhappy. The Celestial Court and Buddhist League had begun a secret plan to expand their armies on Pangu continent. A large number of talented cultivators had been sent to some top-secret places on the continent, and the Celestial Court and Buddhist League had hired almighty experts who were proficient in the divine ability of time to speed up the flow of time, hoping to turn these geniuses into the new forces of the Celestial Court and Buddhist League in a short time. According to Hei Mo's intelligence alone, the delightful sect, where Hei Mo was now hanging around, had selected 8 million boys and girls with excellent aptitudes from the tens of thousands of outer heavenly realms controlled by the delightful sect. Under the protection of 18 Buddhas of the delightful sect, they were cultivating in seclusion somewhere on Pangu continent. 99% of these 8 million boys and girls were cultivation vessels. The cultivation technique of the delightful Zen sect was the fastest to master, and it was one of the fastest in the Buddhist League. As long as these 8 million boys and girls could produce tens of thousands of arhats and thousands of bodhisattvas in a short time, the delightful Zen sect would be able to use the mortal worlds to plunder the power of virtue and will, and produce hundreds of Buddhas in a short time. This was just the work of the delightful Zen sect. There were dozens of sects in the Buddhist League that had a higher status and were stronger than the delightful Zen sect. From this, one could estimate how much power the Buddhist League had invested. Not only the Buddhist League, but there was also the Celestial Court, the Ghost Realm, the Fiend Realm, and the Demon Realm. Chapter 907. The intelligence sent back by Lao AI had attracted the attention of the upper echelons of the East Sea. The actions of the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League had far-reaching consequences. The Celestial Court and the Buddhist League had no shortage of almighty experts who had mastered the divine ability of time. In theory, they could speed up the flow of time like Wu Qi and train a large number of new immortals and Buddhist cultivators. However, there were two conditions that restricted the Heavenly Court and the Buddhist sect. preventing them from doing as they pleased. First, the almighty experts of Heaven and Buddhist League could only speed up the flow of time with their own divine abilities, and the fastest they could do was to speed up the flow of time by a few thousand times, unlike Wu Qi, who could accelerate time tens of thousands of times with the help of external objects. It might take hundreds of thousands of years for immortals and Buddhist cultivators to break through a tier, so a mere few thousand times faster time did not make much sense. In particular, immortals and Buddhas were the most selfish. Even if Wu Qi used Dark Yin Celestial Tower to speed up time, it would consume a huge amount of his blood essence and energy essence. If Wu Qi did not have a way to quickly replenish himself by devouring foreign objects, he would not be able to afford to maintain Dark Yin Celestial Tower for a long time. Immortals and Buddhas had spent tens of thousands of years or even several periods to accumulate a drop of blood essence. Every drop of blood essence contained infinite power and was the source of their lives. How could they sacrifice themselves for the sake of nurturing their juniors? Second, even if the primordial immortals and Buddhas were willing to train their juniors and did not hesitate to use their blood essence to speed up time, outer heavenly realms did not have enough natural energy for them to use. As mentioned earlier, even a gold immortal needed the resources of an entire galaxy to ensure his cultivation, and outer heavenly realms could not provide enough natural energy to train soldiers in large numbers like Wu Qi. But now, the situation had changed dramatically. Outer heavenly realms were invading Pangu continent, and he was having a hard time just dealing with these invading immortal sects and human kingdoms. With a few primordial immortals and Buddhas sneaked into Pangu continent and occupied a few giant energy veins, they were able to produce a large number of low-level immortals and Buddhas in a short time. Among them, there were likely to be 3 to 5 talented ones who could quickly grow into gold immortals and bodhisattvas. With Pangu continent's rich resources and countless rare spirit herbs, even if those primordial immortals and Buddhas lost some blood essence, they could replenish it with spirit pills and miraculous herbs. Naturally, they were happy to expand the number of their disciples and expand their power. While the celestial court and the Buddhist sects were pleased with themselves, Wu Qi was under a lot of pressure. For a long time, the reason why Yu was able to fight against the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League was not only because of the Wahuang clan's support, but also because the cultivation method of the human race was extremely fast. In 30 to 50 years, they could cultivate a group of powerful warriors and priests. Regardless of whether it was a general or a priest, they all had their own flaws. But as long as they worked together, the overall strength they could exert was enough to fight against the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League. Especially when you had a large number of people, hundreds of millions of warriors and priests could be quickly summoned when needed. Because of this huge number, the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League would not dare to provoke Yu. But once the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League began to cultivate a large number of subordinates as Yu had done, the consequences would be too serious. When Yu could not maintain an absolute numerical advantage in military power, Yu was bound to be in an absolutely passive position in terms of strategy. When it came to scheming, Yu's higher-ups were far inferior to the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League. Once Yu was completely suppressed by the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League, Wu Qi's good days would come to an end. Now that the Crown Prince of the Ziwei Lingying Great Celestial Emperor of the Celestial Court had been killed by Wu Qi, once the Celestial Court slowed down and focused on dealing with Yu, Wu Qi would be the first to bear the brunt. The East Sea was a vast territory, with so many relatives and friends involved. If the East Sea was destroyed by the Celestial Court, Wu Qi would not be able to face the world anymore. Lao Ai's secret military intelligence was quickly sent to Liangzhu. Wu Qi and a group of higher-ups of the East Sea secretly went out to gather information in various places. In particular, the map of Pangu's mountains and rivers in the East Sea was monitored day and night. Whenever an abnormal consumption of natural energy was found, it would be reported immediately, and the army of the East Sea would go all out to wipe out that abnormal energy. Wu Qi and Princess Zhang traveled together in the eastern provinces for 2 months. According to the means of the almighty experts of the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League, the disciples they had trained should have been cultivating for more than 1,000 years. If they had enough aptitude, They should have successfully become heaven immortals or arhats by now. However, the eastern provinces were very peaceful. Apart from those immortal sects who were still fighting for the blessed lands and the human kingdoms who were also fighting fiercely against each other, there was no unusual movement. Ao Buzan, Lord Xianxing, and the others had also gone out separately, but the news they sent back was that they had not found anything wrong. Gigu Zi led a group of disciples to search along the few huge underground energy veins under the East Sea for a long time. They carefully surveyed the tens of thousands of spirit caves along the way, but found nothing. No one knew where the almighty experts of the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League were hiding, and no trace of them had been found. But the matter was so urgent that Wu Qi and the others dared not to relax. They continued to send out a large number of people to search everywhere. Even Dayu's punishment court had sent out countless spies with sharp ears and eyes, and all kinds of strange human species under Dayu's rule had been sent out to search every inch of land in all directions of Liangzhu, hoping to find the primordial experts of the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League, and wipe them out with a thunderous force. After searching for a long time to no avail, Wu Qi and Princess Zhang came to a plain surrounded by mountains. It was originally a plain, but after a dozen outer heavenly realms had landed here and reintegrated with Pangu continent, a large number of towering mountains had appeared. Between the mountains were dozens of winding paths that led to the outside, and in the middle, a piece of land about half the size of Zhong province had become a battlefield for more than 40 human kingdoms. In less than a year, these human kingdoms who had come to Pangu continent had built countless cities, large and small, and each of them was equipped with anti-flying formations, just like Great Yu's. More than 40 kingdoms, each with at least 300,000 to 500,000 soldiers, and at most 1,000,000 to 800,000 soldiers, were engaged in a messy fight here. They had no allies, no standpoint, no right or wrong, and just fought and killed each other desperately. Standing on a cloud, Wu Qi and Princess Zhang had concealed themselves with a minor restrictive spell. With their amazing divine abilities, the vast plain was no different from a small chessboard in their eyes, and the thousands of cities built by more than 40 kingdoms were the chess pieces on the chessboard. Countless ants surrounded these chess pieces and stirred up a storm of blood, but they did not even know what they were fighting for. At least 20 emperors had personally led the armies, and when they fought, they all claimed to be the new emperors of the human race, believing that they were the destined sacred emperors of the human race, and that they were destined to unify the human race, overthrow the tyrannical and decadent Dayu, and lead the human race into a new world. Both of them found it funny that all of them claimed to be the human emperors and believed that they were the reincarnations of the sacred emperors. They wondered what kind of drug the Celestial Court and Buddhist League had fed them, which made them all have the sweet dream of ascending to the heavens in a single bound. On this day, 2 kingdoms were engaged in a decisive battle, and the army of one kingdom had reached the capital of the other kingdom. Millions of soldiers had surrounded the city, and there were still tens of thousands of soldiers garrisoned in the city. Blood was splashing in all directions. The army of the kingdom that was besieging the city had an absolute advantage, as the defenders on the walls were killed from time to time. A gray vortex enveloped the top of the city, and the souls of the slain defenders were sucked into the vortex as soon as they flew up into the sky. Wu Qi and Princess Zhang were so curious about the battle that they almost overlooked the gray vortex, which emanated an extremely obscure aura. It was also because the strength of the person controlling the vortex was too weak, for he only had the cultivation base of a nascent divinity cultivator. Wu Qi and Princess Zhang had been cultivating in seclusion in Dark Yin Celestial Tower for tens of thousands of years, so it was difficult for any aura below the realm of primordial to attract their attention. That was why they almost overlooked the existence of the gray vortex. It was just like how an ant could not pose a threat to a dragon. Over time, the dragon's senses would become dull and numb, and the tiny ant would no longer attract his attention. They exchanged a glance and raised their brows in surprise at the same time. "Damn it, we were not like this before," Wu Qi muttered under his breath. Princess Zhang pursed her lips and nodded her head without making a sound. In the past, Wu Qi and Princess Zhang Li's senses were so sensitive that nothing in the outside world could hide from them. But now, a little nascent divinity cultivator was playing tricks right under their noses, and they almost let him go. Cold sweat broke out from their backs. If this was not a little nascent divinity cultivator, but an almighty expert who had compressed his aura to the level of a nascent divinity cultivator, would they not be at risk of being assassinated? Terrified, Wu Qi and Princess Zhongli immediately spread out their divine senses and raised their sensitivity to the highest level. Immediately, Wu Qi and Princess Zhongli discovered that there were hundreds of similar gray vortexes in the clouds. 3 nascent divinity cultivators and more than 30 nascent soul cultivators were controlling these gray vortexes, collecting the souls and blood essence of the dead soldiers on the battlefield. If Wu Qi had not seen the rare fate of a dead general who possessed the 7-killing innate fate, and whose soul carried an astonishing murderous aura, and curiously glanced at his soul, he would not have discovered such a mysterious phenomenon in the clouds high up in the sky. Just think about it, 3 nascent divinity cultivators and more than 30 nascent soul cultivators were nothing compared to Wu Qi, who was a Tao-breaking cultivator. Shaking his head, Wu Qi enveloped these cultivators with his divine sense. Then he was struck dumb. These cultivators were wearing jade medallions on their belts, and judging from the insignia, they were all official immortal officials of the celestial court. Wu Qi shuddered. It seemed he had found the right person. Chapter 908. The quiet and beautiful valley was densely covered with wisterias, on which fist-sized fiery red flowers bloomed, dyeing the whole valley as if it was on fire. Immortal Jadebone sat lazily under an ancient pine tree, slowly brewing a pot of tribute tea from the celestial court. The clear green tea was full of immortal energy. With her cultivation base as a 7th-tier primordial immortal, she could clearly feel her magic power growing stronger with every sip of the tea. It was indeed a wonderful tea that only the 6 supreme experts of the celestial court could enjoy. But now, for the sake of the great plan of the celestial court and the Buddhist League, immortal Jadebone could not believe that the tribute tea, which was produced only a little every period, was being used as a favor. It was truly a wonderful thing. Immortal Jadebone, who had a beautiful face and a slim figure, moaned in a low voice. Her moan of ecstasy made the few tall and strong immortals in black Taoist robes standing beside her shudder. Some of them blushed, and it was clear that they could no longer control their lust. Immortal Jadebone gave them a smug look. They were all good people who practiced orthodox immortal magic from the Taoist League, and had the best foundation and aptitude. But now they were all her gigolos. Sighing contentedly, Immortal Jadebone focused all her attention on the teacup. Immortal Jadebone had emptied the bone marrow of these gigolos, and in a few days, she would have to ask the celestial court for a few strong new men. As for these old disciples, Immortal Jadebone happened to want to make a few trinkets for her disciples. They were all gold immortals, and there was still a lot of spirit chi left in their bones, which made them excellent materials. A faint mist lingered in the valley, and a void could be vaguely seen amidst the dreamy mist. Immortal Jadebone released her interstitial world, which covered hundreds of millions of miles in circumference and length. 7,200,000 fiend cultivators were cultivating in seclusion in this interstitial world. Among them, many fiend immortals with excellent foundations and rapid progress had been taken as disciples by Immortal Jadebone. 72 pitch-black demonic cauldrons hovered over the valley, emanating spiritual energy that seemed almost tangible, which kept pouring into Immortal Jadebone's interstitial world. What a rich and pure energy! Whether it was the 33 heavens, the Great Vulture Mountain, or the Jade Bone Stream in the Fiend Realm where Immortal Jadebone had been meditating in seclusion, there was no place that had more and purer energy than Pangu Continent. Each demonic cauldron corresponded to 108 auxiliary cauldrons in the outside world. Each auxiliary cauldron corresponded to 360 flag gates. Each flag gate corresponded to 1,080 small spirit gathering formations. Tens of millions of small energy gathering formations, no more than 10 feet in circumference, densely covered the tiny energy veins around the valley. Each formation was absorbing the energy in those veins, but the absorption was so small that it would never trigger a warning from Dayu's Panga's map. The energy absorbed by tens of millions of small energy-gathering formations kept gathering through the gates and auxiliary cauldrons, and eventually returned to the 72 demonic cauldrons, turning into such strong energy that it was injected into the interstitial world for the 7,200,000 fiend cultivators to cultivate. This trick was devised by a fiend emperor in the fiend realm, and immortal Jadebone had been using it for months without attracting anyone's attention. It was too wonderful for words. Looking at the fiend immortals who were meditating in seclusion in the interstitial world, immortal Jadebone suddenly thought of the fiend emperor who was as wise as a demon and as strong as an ox. She could not help but feel hot all over, and the fire in her lower abdomen made her moan in a low voice. Upon hearing immortal Jadebone's moans, a few fiendish cultivators, who had just flown down from the sky on clouds, blushed, tightened their lower bodies, and then spurted out. In the end, they fell from the clouds in a sorry state and almost broke their necks. With a red face, immortal Jadebone pointed lazily at the few nascent divinity fiend cultivators and scolded them with a smile. "What a bunch of useless fools! How are you going to fight those oracles of Dayu in the future if you can't even withstand such a small battle?" The fiend cultivators, who had almost ejected out of their bodies, rose to their feet in embarrassment, quickened their pace, and walked to immortal Jadebone with trembling legs. Then, they placed a few large blood-colored jars in front of her respectfully. One of the demonic cultivators smiled and said respectfully, "Ancestor, the side we were in charge of today had 7 kingdoms fighting, and in one day and one night, 139,583 soldiers died. The souls and blood essences of all the fallen soldiers are here." Immortal Jadebone arched her brows delightedly. She reached out a finger to one of the jars and pulled out a twisted figure. She opened her mouth and inhaled. The figure howled miserably as he turned into a beam of dark light and was sucked into her mouth. She licked her lips in an intoxicated manner and said contentedly, "These dead ghosts who practice the cultivation technique of the human race are indeed full of blood essence. Their souls taste wonderful." This was the benefit that the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League had brought to fiend immortals like her when they conspired against Pangu continent. With wars happening all the time, a large number of soldiers were killed in battle. The Celestial Court and the Buddhist League had opened their doors wide, allowing immortal Jadebone and the other fiend immortals to collect souls and blood essence at will, devour them directly, or use them to craft magical treasures. They could do whatever they wanted, and there would be no troublemakers who would get in the way of slaying fiends. It was a luxurious feast, and immortal Jadebone had plenty of time to enjoy it before the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League finally took control of Pangu continent. At the thought of this, the heat in her lower abdomen made her feel more and more uncomfortable. She moaned a few times and pointed a finger at her interstitial world. A few tall, strong, handsome cultivators, shrouded in faint black smoke, flew out of it with strange cries. Clearly, they had achieved a high level of attainment in the cultivation technique of the Fiend League. Immortal Jadebone's thin gauze skirt slid down her body. She smiled coquettishly and pressed the fiendish cultivators to the ground. Then, she cast a restrictive spell to immobilize them, then excitedly mounted them and screamed happily. The fiend cultivator, who had been brimming with energy, began to tremble violently. As immortal Jadebone rode him, his muscular muscles began to wither, and his smooth skin turned dull. In just a few breaths of time, he looked as if he had aged 30 to 50 years. Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu, who had followed the few nascent divinity cultivators to the valley, exchanged a glance. Princess Zhonglu rolled her eyes at Wu Qi and said with a cold snort, "It's a pity that she's not a virgin. Otherwise, I wouldn't be a jealous woman, and it would be nice to have a fiend immortal among your concubines, husband. From the looks of it, she seems to be a sensible person." Wu Qi shuddered. He laughed dryly and said, "Well, I can't take it." He glanced at immortal Jadebone, who had taken off her gauze dress, and realized that Wu Qi really could not take it. Jadebone Immortal's appearance was extremely beautiful, and her figure was perfect, without any flaws. However, the muscles below her neck were completely transparent. Through her crystal-like muscles, one could clearly see her jade-colored bones and cyan meridians. In her red blood vessels, there was a black, viscous fluid flowing, and all her internal organs could be seen clearly. After reaching the realm of primordial, immortal Jadebone's internal organs had transformed from acquired to innate. They corresponded to the 5 innate energies, and their color had become particularly bright and dazzling. Wu Qi shuddered at the thought of him having sex with immortal Jadebone. At first glance, she was not a beauty at all, but a pile of internal organs in vigorous motion. The visual stimulation was too much, and Wu Qi did not have such a good appetite. Princess Zhonglu snorted and turned her beautiful eyes to look at the 72 fiend cauldrons hanging high above the valley. Her divine sense penetrated through them like a spring breeze, and soon, Princess Zhonglu figured out the origin of these cauldrons. No wonder Senior Gigazi and the others found nothing even after searching for so long, she exclaimed. They didn't do anything to the big veins at all, but just gathered some of the energy from the small veins. Wu Qi raised his eyebrows. It was a clever idea, and he wondered who came up with it. All the provinces of Dayu had the Pangas map to monitor the unusual movements of the various veins. If they tampered with the big veins, they would not be able to hide it from Dayu's eyes and ears. How could Dayu find out what they were doing when they used tens of millions of small energy-gathering formations to gather a small amount of energy from a large area? This is a good idea. We can learn from it in the East Sea in the future. The energy in the spirit cave under the East Sea city is not enough for us to use in the East Sea. Wu Qi rolled up his sleeve and put away all 72 fiend cauldrons. His divine power had reached the point where he could command them with just a thought. As soon as the cauldrons moved, the auxiliary cauldrons, flag gates, and small energy-gathering formations flew up at the same time, flashed across the void, and were all put into Wu Qi's sleeve. Immortal Jadebone, who was riding on the fiend cultivator, was shocked. She jerked her head up and cried out, "Who dares to provoke me?" Wu Qi pointed a finger at her. Immediately, 36,000 streams of primordial purple energy transformed into a huge net and wrapped around Immortal Jadebone's interstitial world. Immortal Jadebone lost contact with her interstitial world, and she screamed in terror. As a 7th-tier primordial immortal, only a Tao-breaking cultivator could easily deprive her of her control over her interstitial world. A Tao-breaking almighty expert. Immortal Jadebone was so frightened that she slapped the fiend cultivator beneath her with both hands. Suddenly, she transformed into a ball of white bones and shot up into the sky, then fled into the distance. But when she was less than 3 miles away, a beam of 5-colored divine light fell silently. The innate energy essence of 5 elements shattered the magic power in her body. As soon as the divine light retracted, Immortal Jadebone was lifted by Princess Zhonglu by the neck. Immortal Jadebone screamed in a hoarse voice, "Please spare my life, Senior. I'm willing to be your slave." Princess Zhonglu slapped Immortal Jadebone in the face and snapped rudely, "Shut up. Do you think someone like you deserves to be my husband's slave? Look at you, why do you look like a ghost? Wouldn't it be a disgrace to us if I took you as my slave?" Immortal Jadebone opened her mouth, but could not say a word after being scolded by Princess Zhonglu. She looked at her sparkling and translucent body with a bit of grievance. Speaking of which, she was a great beauty in the devil realm. Why didn't you go and see how those female devil fairies who didn't have any human charm were described? Wu Qi clenched his fist and cried out, "Rise?" Immortal Jadebone's interstitial world shrank into a cloud of mist the size of a human head, which was then swallowed by Wu Qi. Wu Qi's chaotic world pounced forward like a hungry wolf, quickly devouring Immortal Jadebone's interstitial world. Immortal Jadebone let out a shrill cry. She could sense that her interstitial world was disappearing rapidly. Princess Zhonglu punched Immortal Jadebone in the back of the head and knocked her out. Chapter 909. With a few cracking sounds, the wolf fang buckles forged by Wu Qi himself broke into several pieces on Immortal Jadebone's fingers. Huang Liang and Yuan Qing, who were torturing immortal Jade Bone, cried out in horror. How could her bones be so hard? Wu Qi, who was watching from the side, had his expression changed. There was nothing special about this wolf fang finger buckle, as it was crafted using several dozens of extremely hard materials. It had taken him a great deal of thought to forge this batch of instruments of torture. In terms of hardness alone, they could easily crush the phalanges of ordinary primordial immortals. But immortal Jade Bone lived up to her name. Her bones were so hard that the buckles, which Wu Qi had carefully forged, failed to break her bones. Instead, they shattered themselves. Standing off to the side, Yen Bugui's face was unsightly. He took out a few other instruments of torture he had drawn and forged himself, and asked Huang Liang and Yuan Qing to put them on immortal Jade Bone. More than a dozen torture tools that could tear a person to pieces were activated at the same time. Although immortal Jade Bone was lying unscathed on the ground, all the torture tools had been shattered into pieces. Lord Xianxing and the others could not help but gasp. Why was immortal Jade Bone so difficult to deal with? Wu Qi and Princess Zhangli looked at each other speechlessly. They had no other way to deal with immortal Jade Bone. After her interstitial world was devoured by Wu Qi and captured alive by Princess Zhangli, immortal Jade Bone immediately fused her immortal soul with her bones, which made her bones harder and harder. Wu Qi had used several soul-searching techniques, but he had failed to extract immortal Jade Bone's soul from her bones. Clearly, the technique she used to fuse her soul with her bones was a mystic art of her own creation, which gave her an excellent resistance to all kinds of soul-searching techniques. Princess Zhongli's various soul-controlling techniques were also useless against immortal Jade Bone. Immortal Jade Bone's cultivation technique was extremely bizarre. Even with the knowledge of Wu Qi and Princess Zhongli, the complete fusion of her soul with her bones was unheard of. It was a very evil divine ability, but its effect was very strong. Wu Qi and Princess Zhongli had been torturing her for a long time, but they could not do anything to her. Yet, they could not bear to just turn her into ashes, so they could only torture her with physical torture. But, all the torture tools designed by Yen Bugui and made by Wu Qi were shattered, and they could do nothing to immortal Jade Bone. This made Wu Qi feel a little headache. If it was Wu Qi who directly tortured immortal Jade Bone, he could easily shatter her bones, but no one knew how her bones and soul were fused. If Wu Qi accidentally tore her soul apart, he would not be able to get anything useful from her soul. Like a dog biting a hedgehog, Wu Qi and his companions looked at immortal Jade Bone, who was lying on the ground with her eyes rolled back, and could not do anything to her. With a wry smile, Wu Qi touched his nose and said to immortal Jade Bone with a sigh, "Immortal Jade Bone, didn't you say earlier that you would be our slave and let us order you around?" Immortal Jade Bone looked at Wu Qi with her blank eyes and said with a sneer, "If you can capture me alive, what's so difficult about being my slave? We immortals of the fiend path believe in the strong, and the strong are respected. I'm naturally willing to submit to you. But you? Hee, now that I've fallen into the hands of your Diu, I'll be killed no matter what. Don't even think about getting any benefits from me." Like a tortoise who had eaten a weight, immortal Jade Bone made up her mind not to let Wu Qi and his companions take advantage of her. After a long silence, Wu Qi glanced at Lord Xianxing. A chaos spirit artifact could certainly break immortal Jade Bone's bones, but its power was not easy to control. If it accidentally hurt the core of her soul, wouldn't it be a waste of all their efforts? Could they ask Wu Qi to forge a few chaos spirit artifact torture tools for immortal Jade Bone? That was preposterous. The group of people stared at immortal Jade Bone and pondered for a long time, but they could not do anything to her. Dao Buzan rolled his eyes for a while, then suddenly burst out laughing. "Isn't she just a woman? Isn't it easy to get rid of her? Watch me, Lao Tzu." Grabbing immortal Jade Bone with one hand, Dao Buzan stamped his foot and plunged into the ground with her. Wu Qi and Princess Zhongli exchanged a glance, but neither of them stopped Dao Buzan. Perhaps he really had a way to get something valuable out of immortal Jade Bone's mouth? Wu Qi was even more curious. If Dao Buzan could torture out immortal Jade Bone's cultivation technique, it would be of great value. Refining the soul and one's bones into one, This evil method seemed to be very useful. The used Directorate of Celestials used the bones of powerful demon beasts to refine all kinds of talismans. If the souls and bones of these demon beasts could be fused into one, the power of the talismans should be greatly improved, which would definitely be a great supplement to the fighting strength of the East Sea Army. The crowd stood at the top of the mountain, waiting for Audiobook. After 7 days and 7 nights, Audiobook finally emerged from the ground with a satisfied smile on his face. Immortal Jadebone, whose face was red and eyes were almost dripping with tears, followed obediently behind Audiobook. When she saw Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu, she bowed shyly to them like a child bride greeting her parents-in-law and said, "I'm Jadebone, Your Highness. If this little demon has offended you in any way, please forgive me, Your Highness and Your Highness. From today onwards, I'm willing to submit to the East Sea Army, and I'm willing to be a pawn of the East Sea Army at your beck and call." Wu Qi was at a loss, Princess Zhonglu was at a loss, and Yen Bugui glanced at the broken instruments of torture on the ground. His heart ached so much that his face twitched a few times, and his face was also at a loss. Even the instruments of torture forged by Wu Qi himself could not pry open Immortal Jadebone's mouth. So, how did Audiobook persuade her? Looking at the bewildered faces of the crowd, Audiobook laughed wildly with excitement. Slapping his lower body, he said triumphantly, "With this spear, Lao Tzu can kill any god who stands in his way, and with just one thrust of the spear, this fiend has knelt down and submitted. Ha! Torture instruments and soul-searching techniques are all useless. Only my dragon stem divine spear is invincible, and no one in the world can stop me." Immortal Jadebone lowered her head, her face as red as chicken blood. Wu Qi and the others looked at the strange-looking Immortal Jadebone, and then at Audiobook, who was drooling and boasting, and could not help but shiver at the same time. They finally understood why the population of dragons was so large, and why the species of dragons were so complicated. It turned out that Audiobook had no qualms about sex, and he would sleep with any one of the opposite sex. They asked themselves if any of the men present, including Wu Qi, would have any desire for Immortal Jadebone, but not only did Audiobook have the desire, but he also put it into action and subdued Immortal Jadebone. Just how incredible of a thing was this? It really was as he boasted, sweeping through the entire world and no one could stop him. With a few dry coughs, Wu Qi kicked Audiobook far away. He looked at Immortal Jadebone, who was blushing and did not dare to raise her head, and said with a smile, "Immortal Jadebone, are you willing to submit to the East Sea? If you really want to submit, you can offer me the book of fiend cultivation that you practice." Immortal Jadebone answered obediently. Suddenly, the muscles and skin on her head split open, revealing her skull, which was glowing with a green luster and looked like the best jade. Wu Qi and the others shuddered once again. This fiend immortal was indeed a fiend immortal, and his fiend cultivation technique was truly terrifying. Only Audiobook, who was drooling at the side, said with a smile, "This little girl's bones are quite beautiful. When she raised her legs just a few days ago, they were so charming." Lord Xianxing felt goosebumps all over his body. He hurriedly took a few steps to the side to avoid Audiobook. A crisp crack rang out as a thin piece of bone on Immortal Jadebone's skull cracked open. A jade-colored bone the size of a palm flew up and fell into Wu Qi's hand. The bone, which was as thin as a cicada's wing and almost transparent, was densely covered with characters. Upon a closer look, he found that it was a unique divine ability of the fiend path, the Jade Fiend Bone Forging Technique. Through the bone fragment, he memorized the Jade Devil Bone Forging Technique with his divine will. After that, a wisp of green flame burst out from his fingertip, burning the bone fragment into ashes with ease. As Wu Qi had expected, this divine ability of the fiend path was extremely bizarre. All the bone molecules had fused with the soul particles, and the core of the nascent divinity was constantly wandering in the bones. A slight carelessness could destroy Immortal Jadebone's immortal soul as well as her bones. Looking coldly at Immortal Jadebone, who was trembling all over, Wu Qi sneered and said, "See? It's not that we don't have the means to deal with you, but we just want your confession. If you hadn't come to your senses in time and abandoned the darkness for the light, in a few days, when I've comprehended the magic of the fusion of bone and soul, I'll naturally have the means to make you beg for death." Trembling with fear, immortal Jade Bone fell to her knees when she saw that Wu Qi had so easily burned the bones she had tempered with her true flame for countless years. "I've sinned. I'll sincerely pledge my allegiance to you, and I won't go back on my word." Wu Qi nodded and glanced at Princess Zhonglu. Princess Zhonglu pursed her lips into a smile and said softly, "Immortal Jade Bone, since you are from the Fiend Path, we'll act according to the rules of the Fiend Path. Before we're sure that you're sincerely pledging your allegiance to us." Immortal Jadebone's skin and flesh slid down like flowing water, revealing her skeleton, which looked as if it were carved out of beautiful jade. A beautiful figure slid out of the skeleton and floated obediently in front of Princess Zhonglu. The so-called rules of the Fiend Path were nothing more than revealing one's nascent divinity and allowing others to imprison it. Princess Zhonglu did not stand on ceremony. She extracted a wisp of immortal Jadebone's immortal soul and imprisoned it in her interstitial world. After that, she used 99 restrictive spells inherited from the ancient gods to completely control immortal Jadebone's soul. Immortal Jadebone knelt obediently on the ground, not daring to resist. From time to time, she glanced at Xiang Ao out of the corner of her eyes. Her originally cruel and cold eyes were now filled with affection. When Ao Buzan saw immortal Jadebone's appearance, he could not help but straighten his lower body and boast triumphantly. Wu Qi gave Ao Buzan a sidelong glance. He really had nothing to say to this fellow. However, Wu Qi could not help but be deeply curious about Ao Buzan. Did he really subdue immortal Jadebone, a fiendish god of the Fiend Path, with that method? How did this lascivious dragon do it? Chapter 9-10. Golden lotuses were everywhere, Bodhi trees were everywhere, and clear springs were gushing everywhere. A strange fragrance was wafting in the wind. The murmuring of scriptures spread out in the air, transforming into a dense sound wave that decorated this underground cave with a radius of several miles, making it look especially sacred and solemn. 360 golden relics, each the size of a human head, floated in midair, constantly spraying out strong energy and fusing into the golden pure land of Buddhism down below. Just like the demonic cauldron in the Valley of Immortal Jadebone, these relics had connected with countless flags and small energy-gathering formations in the outside world, gathering a huge amount of energy and finally creating such a blessed land in the cave. If someone could see through this land, he would see a pink lotus occupying the entire underground cave. After the cave, which was only a few miles in both width and length, was occupied by the lotus, it had evolved into a pure land of tens of millions of miles in both width and length, filled with golden lotuses and Bodhi trees. Golden pagodas could be seen everywhere, and soft, white cushions could be seen beside the clear springs in the dense forest. Countless beautiful women and strong, handsome men were sitting on the soft, white cushions in the pure land of Buddhism, performing the most primitive reproduction of human beings. These people had all kinds of strange movements, and some were simply unimaginable. They were having sex violently, their bodies colliding with each other and making loud popping noises, but their faces were filled with holiness and solemnity, and their mouths were constantly chanting scriptures. The chanting that filled the entire void was coming from their mouths. All of a sudden, a muscular man, who was riding on a beautiful girl, suddenly uttered the name of Buddha. Two visible golden streams flowed out of the girl's body and into the muscular man's body. A faint pink Buddhist light formed behind the muscular man's head, while a thumb-sized pink lotus flower mark appeared between his eyebrows. The girl's body was drenched in sweat. She turned over, raised her long legs, and wrapped them around the man's waist, which was as strong as a lion. "Congratulations on your success, senior martial brother. Please take good care of me in the future," she said in a charming voice. The man laughed happily. He put his palms together and uttered the name of Buddha, then waved his hands and sprinkled a large sheet of pink Buddha light. The faces of the more than 30 girls, who were resting under the shade of the Bodhi tree, blushed at the same time. They looked at the man, who had become an arhat, with their eyes filled with passion. Before long, more than 30 girls surrounded the man at the same time, and an even more fanatical meeting began. Like a machine that would never tire, the man enjoyed the girls to his heart's content. Streams of golden torrents kept flowing from the girls' bodies into his body. The halo behind the man's head grew brighter and brighter, and the pink lotus mark between his brows grew clearer and clearer, as if a real lotus had been planted between his eyebrows. From time to time, joyful cries could be heard rising into the sky from the Pure Land. Beams of Buddha light flickered everywhere, and the air was filled with a pink, lascivious aura. In the center of the Pure Land, 18 towering golden pagodas formed a circle. There was no spire at the top of each pagoda, but a spacious cloud platform. 18 Buddhas with skin as fair as young girls and bodies as fat as elephants were lazily sitting in the middle of the cloud platform, surrounded by beautiful naked girls lying on the ground. A vast amount of bright light shone from the back of the 18 Buddhas' heads, which intertwined and made the flow of time in the void 7,000 times faster. This was also the result of their joint efforts. If they worked alone, they could only speed up time by 2,000 times at most. But with 18 of them working together, the efficiency was greatly improved. After all, what they were proficient in was the delightful Zen technique, not the divine ability to control time, and they had a very good relationship with each other. That was why the 18 of them were working together. A golden light flashed in the void, as dozens of handsome itinerant monks flew down from the sky, stepping on the pink light with smiles on their faces. The leading itinerant monk had pale golden skin, and a lotus flower vaguely emerged in his eyes. Clearly, he was an almighty Buddhist who had attained the enlightenment of Bodhisattva. Standing on a cloud in the center of the 18 pagodas, the joyful itinerant monk bowed to the Buddhas around him and said, "Dear Buddhas, I've gained a lot from this trip. Over the past few days, 37 kingdoms have been fighting outside this mountain, and the common people have lost their homes and are living in misery. Therefore, I've spent a lot of money to buy over 70,000 young girls with excellent foundations as cultivation vessels." The itinerant monk waved his hand, and over 700 pink lotus flowers drifted out amidst a faint Buddhist light. There were 100 beautiful girls sleeping quietly on each lotus flower. Their ages ranged from 7 or 8 to 15 or 16 years old. One of the Buddhas laughed joyfully and said, "Wonderful! With this, the cultivation speed of our disciples will be even faster. Senior brothers, please do your best to plant the joyful Zen seed in the bodies of these cultivation furnaces. After they cultivate, they will cooperate with the disciples in their cultivation." The Buddhas agreed in unison. They waved their hands, and dozens of lotus flowers drifted into their palms. These Buddhas reached into the lotus flowers and took out a girl, then pressed their fat bodies heavily on top of the girls. Their faces were full of smiles as they exercised the Zen technique and invaded the girls' bodies in a barbaric manner. The girls, who were in a coma, suddenly had their bodies penetrated. They screamed and struggled in pain, and some even tore the faces of these huge monks with their long fingernails. But, no matter how they scratched and bit, the huge monks remained unmoved. Instead, they slowly moved their bodies at a very strange frequency, and gradually, a Buddhist glow drifted out from their bodies. Gradually, the bodies of these girls turned pale red, and before long, they let out joyful cries, their eyes filled with lust. Suddenly, a pink cloud in the void shattered, and Wu Qi and the people of the East Sea quietly invaded this part of the world. Standing on a dark cloud, Immortal Jadebone bowed respectfully to Wu Qi and said, "Your Highness, this is the place where the 18 Buddhas of the blissful sect of Buddhism cultivate in seclusion. 3 of them have dual cultivated with me for a few periods, and my jade devil bone forging art is derived from the invincible golden body of the Buddhist League. I have some friendship with them, and that's why I know that they are cultivating in seclusion here." Wu Qi glanced at the Pure Land, which was full of scenes of sexual intercourse, and could not help but twitch his mouth. The blissful sect was indeed worthy of its reputation. Aobuzen swallowed a mouthful of saliva, then widened his eyes and said with a smile, What a wonderful cultivation technique. What a wonderful place. TSK, why can these bald donkeys abduct women and have fun? Back then, Lao Tzu was killed by a self-explosion just because he wanted to make a vow with a few women? There's no justice at all. Wu Qi gave Ao Buzan a sideways glance. Although these monks also abducted women from the outside world to use as cultivation vessels, they were not stupid enough to provoke opponents who were too powerful. They abducted women from the mortal world and made them use as cultivation vessels to cultivate the blissful sect. Even if these women could cultivate to the realm of Bodhisattva, what could they do to them? Why didn't these blissful Buddhas abduct a few primordial immortals from the celestial court as cultivation vessels? Princess Zhongli looked down at the chaotic scene with disgust. She snorted coldly and said, "These bald donkeys deserve to die. Little K, or burn them all. Burn those women as well, and send their souls to be reincarnated. As for the souls of these bald donkeys, just destroy them." Little Her answered, then threw her head back and let out a crisp chirp. A crimson flame spread gradually, and in the blink of an eye, it had covered the entire Pure Land that was tens of millions of miles in circumference. Waves of heat swept out in all directions, scorching the golden lotuses and Bodhi trees down below, and evaporating the spring water. In just a blink of an eye, the Pure Land of Buddhism had turned into a red-hot kiln. 18 Buddhas, who were enjoying the tender flesh of young girls, suddenly jumped to their feet. They looked up at the sky and cried out, "Who is making things difficult for us, fellow Taoist? We are the 18 blissful Buddhas under the head of the delightful Zen sect. Fellow Taoist." Quietly, Wu Qi came between the 18 pagodas. Standing on a white cloud, he glanced at the Buddhas with a cold, merciless gaze. They felt that Wu Qi's gaze had pierced through their bodies like a blade, and the biting chill made them afraid to say a word. The realm of Tao breaking had an absolute advantage over the realm of Tao reasoning. Wu Qi's enormous divine sense turned into a storm and battered the 18 blissful Buddhas. The Buddhas, who were famous for their powerful willpower and divine sense, could not resist the invasion of Wu Qi's divine sense. Each and every one of them struggled to defend their minds. Their divine sense was like a candle in the wind, about to be extinguished by Wu Qi's divine sense at any time. The Buddhas groaned in despair. Even the Lord Buddha, Amitabha, could not suppress them like this. Only an existence stronger than the Lord Buddha could exert such tremendous pressure on them. A Tao-breaking cultivator. How could there be a Tao-breaking expert on Pangu continent? Shouldn't those freakish Tao-breaking experts abide by the iron law set by the few Daozu and Buddhas, and live in seclusion in the realm beyond heaven outside the 9 heavens? Could it be that those people had made a move? Did they join hands to deal with the conspiracy of the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League? At the thought of the horror of those existences, the 18 blissful Buddhas broke out in a cold sweat. Their legs were trembling, and they could no longer support their enormous weight. Almost at the same time, they sat down on the cloud platform, causing the golden pagodas below to tremble violently. Wu Qi smiled pleasantly. These people were pushovers and they were easy to deal with. With immortal Jadebone as an example, Wu Qi would never expose his identity as Diyu, king of East Sea. He pinched his throat and said with a cold grin, "I'm an itinerant cultivator from the outer heavens. I was just passing by and saw you evil monks abducting innocent girls to show off your power. I'll do justice for heaven and kill all of you evil monks." The monstrous Nanmingli fire came whistling down, burning everything in the Pure Land to ashes. Amidst the cries and wails, the disciples of the Buddhist League who were practicing the delightful meditation technique were burned to ashes, and their cultivation vessels were engulfed by the fire. The true fire of Phoenix was the best at purifying all impurities. In the bright flame, the souls of the disciples were burned to ashes, while the souls of girls, pure and without any impurities, flew up into the sky and entered the transmigration with a smile on their faces. The blissful Buddhas screamed hoarsely. They could only repeat the words "Senior, have mercy," over and over again, and their souls were almost torn to pieces by the impact of Wu Qi's divine sense. Wu Qi smiled grimly. With a flick of his sleeve, he pulled all the Buddhas into it. With a flip of his hand, a purple thunderbolt fell silently. With a crisp clap of thunder, the cave and the mountain above Chi-Chi turned into smoke and dissipated. Chapter 9:11. Masters, you are all really good people. About 30 provinces away from the underground cave that Wu Qi had destroyed, in a remote and barren valley, 18 fair and fat Buddhas lay in a heap on the ground. They forced a smile, but it was uglier than crying, especially when Wu Qi praised them as good people. Tears almost flowed down their cheeks. Wu Qi, on the other hand, was grinning from ear to ear. He was praising these monks from the bottom of his heart, without any falsehood. With just a slight threat of the nirvana flame, the 18 monks told him everything they knew about the celestial court and Buddhism. However, these delightful Buddhas preferred to spend their time with women and did not pay much attention to the various plans of Buddhism. Therefore, there was not much they could tell him. However, they only told him what they knew about the dozens of secluded cultivation sites of Buddhism and the celestial court, which was enough to make Wu Qi happy. In addition, these monks obediently handed over everything they had, including their cultivation methods, the Buddhist palms they had refined, and all their savings. Everything was taken away by Wu Qi. Not to mention the cultivation methods, Wu Qi now had 90,000 concubines. If this delightful Zen was used on the evil path, it would be a demonic cultivation method that benefited himself at the expense of others, but if it was used on the right path, it would be a wonderful method that benefited both himself and others. If he were to use this technique to cultivate with his 90,000 concubines in turn, they would be able to improve their cultivation base to a great extent. Aobuzan was very fond of this delightful Zen. He happily snatched the jade slip with the cultivation method and pulled a mortal jade bone to the side to cultivate. Maybe he really had the potential to become a delightful Buddha. With the characteristics of Aobuzan's current cultivation method, it was not difficult for him to cultivate a Buddhist Dharma at the same time. Each of the 18 Buddhas had refined 800 Buddhist kingdoms in their palms, and each Buddhist kingdom was filled with countless women who worshipped them. These women were the human cauldrons of these Buddhas during their long years of cultivation. Eventually, under the influence of their Dharma, they became their fanatical believers. As the cultivation time of these Buddhas was measured in hundreds of eons, even if they changed a cauldron every year, after so many years, the number of women in their Buddhist kingdom would still be extremely terrifying. All the girls had their memories erased by Wu Qi and thrown into the transmigration. They were just a bunch of pitiful people, and Wu Qi did not have the heart to sacrifice them to Lei Meng. Wu Qi devoured these Buddhist kingdoms, and the enormous spiritual energy in them made Wu Qi's interstitial world much larger. As for the savings of these Buddhas, Wu Qi was pleasantly surprised. They were even richer than Amitabha's trusted follower, Buddha Fudu. After all, Buddha Fudu had just attained the human form not long ago, while these 18 Buddhas had been Buddhas for many years. Although outer heavenly realms had little natural energy and resources, these Buddhas held a high position in the blissful sect. Each of them controlled hundreds of thousands of outer heavenly realms and had countless disciples. In order to win their favor, their disciples naturally did their best to search for all kinds of natural treasures and offer them as tributes. The Buddhas of the blissful sect did not need any spirit herbs or energy stones to help them with their cultivation. Their best supplement was the human cauldrons, so they consumed very little of the natural treasures they had. From time to time, their disciples would offer them tributes, but they did not consume much of their own. One could imagine how many treasures these 18 Buddhas had. At least, the total amount of resources Wu Qi had received from Diyu over the years when Emperor Haozuan had freely provided the East Sea with all kinds of resources was less than 10% of the personal wealth of a Buddha of delightful sect. You guys are really good people. Wu Qi squinted at the piles of rare treasures in his interstitial world and praised these Buddhas again. There were so many spirit herbs, so many energy stones, so many immortal stones, so many rare minerals, and so many innate artifacts. With his current means, they represented countless divine weapons, countless spirit pills, and miraculous medicines, which meant that the army that Dong Hai could support could be multiplied several times. After being praised as good people twice in a row, the 18 Buddhas were scared out of their wits by Wu Qi's strange tone. The fattest Buddha among them, who also had the strongest cultivation base, cried out sternly, "Fellow Taoist, you have no grudge against our Buddhist League. As long as you are merciful and let us go today, we are willing to swear a heavy oath that we will never look into what happened today again. I've killed so many of your disciples, snatched your secret cultivation technique, snatched your Buddhist kingdom in the palm, and robbed all of your belongings, and you still won't look into what happened today?" Wu Qi shook his head and said with a chuckle, "I'd better not let you go." The Buddhas turned pale with fear. Just as they were about to say something, Wu Qi pointed a finger at them and sealed their mouths, making them unable to utter another word. Then he whispered something into Princess Zhongli's ear. The Princess Zhongli smiled and gently pinched the soft flesh on Wu Qi's waist. After saying a few words to the others, she took Ao Buzin and flew southwest. According to the confessions of these Buddhas, the 3 primordial immortals of the celestial court were cultivating in seclusion in that direction. Looking at the 18 panic-stricken Buddhas, Wu Qi could not help but shake his head and say, "I'm the meat on the chopping block, and you are the meat on the chopping block. It's a pity that you have cultivated for countless eons, but today you have turned the tables on me. How pitiful! Listen up, monks, we have no grudge against each other, but we are just on different sides. Your vows are unbelievable. Wouldn't it be a pity to let go of such a fine body of yours?" Clapping his hands, Wu Qi put his palms together and bowed to the group of monks with a smile on his face. "Thank you for your help," he said. The 18 Buddhas moaned and writhed as they looked at Wu Qi in panic, looking as pitiful and helpless as young girls who had run into a sex fiend in the middle of the night. Wu Qi looked at them with a smile. A plume of purple smoke burst out of his forehead, and then the heaven-refining cauldron slowly flew out. "Fiend-slaying sword formation, rise." Wu Qi let out a long laugh. 36,000 Kunwu swords shot out of the cauldron and quickly formed a formation within 100 miles of the valley. Then he opened his mouth and breathed out a stream of misty primordial Shen energy, shrouding the valley in a thin mist and disappearing without a trace. With the sword formation on the outside, no one could discover anything unusual and no aura would leak out. The lid of the cauldron opened, and a plume of purple smoke burst out. The 18 Buddhas were sucked into the cauldron, and the lid quickly closed. Then, Wu Qi rubbed his palms and sprayed plumes of purple smoke and sparks at the cauldron. Immediately, a violent purple flame burst out of the cauldron. Before the Buddhas imprisoned by Wu Qi could even make a grunt, their kasayas were burned to ashes by the purple flame. Their fair bodies rang out with a deafening ringing that sounded like the ringing of a bronze bell. Amidst the ringing of the bell were the faint cries of Buddha and the moans of young girls. Perhaps knowing what Wu Qi was going to do to them, the 18 Buddhas closed their eyes at the same time, their lips moving slightly as they recited the name of Buddha. A large amount of pink mist floated out of their bodies. The moment the pink mist touched the purple fire, it was burned completely. The bodies of the Buddhas seemed to gradually shrink as the pink mist burned. Their originally fat bodies gradually shriveled up. The raging fire lasted for 7 days and 7 nights. By then, the bodies of the Buddhas had been refined into 18 bamboo poles, and there was no more pink mist left in them. Their bodies were glinting with a golden light as if they were forged of pure gold. A layer of clear Buddha light surrounded the bodies of these Buddhas, resisting the invasion of the purple flame. But as the wind and fire roared in the heaven-refining cauldron, this thin layer of Buddha light trembled violently as if it would shatter at any time. A soft sigh was heard as a Buddha of joy shouted in a deep voice, "Senior brothers, I'm afraid we won't be able to survive this devil tribulation today. Let's fight this fiendish devil to the death, but don't ruin the reputation of Buddhism." Before his voice died away, the purple flame had burned through the Buddha light on the surface of the Buddha's body and touched his body. The Buddha's body, which seemed to be forged of pure gold, melted quickly and turned into a mass of golden liquid, suspended in the heaven-refining cauldron. There were 13 fist-sized pink relics floating in the liquid, but under the high temperature, the pink aura inside the relics was rapidly dissipating. Not long after, they were refined into a pure white color. Long howls rang out, and the glabella of the other 17 Buddhas exploded. More or less, their natal relics flew out and were about to explode. But how could Wu Qi allow them to explode their relics? He struck the heaven-refining cauldron with an incantation gesture, and the purple flame inside condensed into tens of thousands of tiny runes the size of mung beans, imprinting them on the relics and sealing them firmly. He opened his mouth and spat out a stream of natal energy into the cauldron, compressing the flame into a crystal-like solid. At the same time, the golden bodies and relics of the 18 Buddhas emitted a bright light and were finally refined into a liquid the size of a water tank. He unleashed Dark Ein's celestial tower to envelop the surroundings, speeding up the time here to the maximum. From the personal savings handed over by these Buddhas, he took out 128 kinds of rare spirit herbs and threw them into the heaven-refining cauldron. He quickly refined these spirit herbs into balls of clear air and merged them into the liquid of the Buddha's golden body. After a whole month had passed in the outside world, a thunderous roar rang out in the heaven-refining cauldron. Hundreds of pills shrouded in purple mist flew out of the cauldron and turned into meteors that were about to fly into the distance. Wu Qi reached out with one hand and a total of 108 pills fell into his palm. Holding the pills, which were as big as red dates and contained great medicinal power, Wu Qi could not help but narrow his eyes and smile. He had some new plans and they were going to rely on these pills. Chapter 9:12. More than half a month after the Jin Dan was refined, Princess Zhang Le finally returned with all the spoils. 7 primordial immortals of the celestial court, 2 primordial immortals of the fiend realm, 1 primordial immortal of the demon realm, and 32 Buddhas of the Buddhist League were the spoils of Princess Zhang Li's trip. Wu Qi did not stand on ceremony. He immediately refined all the primordial immortals into pills, and then quickly returned to the East Sea with them. After distributing the pills, which contained a vast amount of energy essence to Ao Buzan and his other confidants, Wu Qi summoned everyone for a secret meeting. He left all the blood-draining celestial fiends to guard the East Sea, and spread the word that Wu Qi was cultivating in seclusion. Occasionally, one of the blood-draining celestial fiends would take the form of Wu Qi and show up in public. Princess Zhang Le took over Wu Qi's place to manage all the administrative affairs in the East Sea, while Wu Qi left the East Sea with Gigu, Zi, and Mod, 2 grandmasters from the 6 states. The East Sea had withdrawn its claws and fangs, only guarding the borders of the East Sea and some of the provinces in the eastern region, while those people from outer heavenly realms and the immortal sects were allowed to do whatever they wanted in other places. The East Sea, which had just been stirred up by a storm of blood not long ago, was now as calm as a pool of stagnant water, without any ripples. The Celestial Court and the Buddhist League had lost a large number of primordial immortals, and no matter how they pursued the matter, it had nothing to do with the East Sea. Wu Qi and Princess Zhang Le had done it cleanly, leaving no clues behind. No matter how the higher-ups of the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League racked their brains, they could not implicate the East Sea in the matter. Under Princess Zhang Li's control, the East Sea was quietly accumulating power, ready to respond at any time. 7 days after Wu Qi left the East Sea, in a remote area in the southern region of Diyu, a large cloud of clear mist suddenly rose from a nameless mountain. 3 enormous white cranes carried 3 men in Taoist robes and flew up into the sky. He was wearing a green Taoist robe embroidered with patterns of clouds, water, and dragons. His hair was tied up in a bun, and he carried a green sharkskin scabbard and a 3-feet-long sword made of brass. He was surrounded by a clear and elegant aura, and there were faint white clouds hovering around him. It was none other than Wu Qi. It was just that he had slightly altered his appearance. Even those who were extremely close to him would not be able to recognize him. He was wearing a black Taoist robe embroidered with patterns of the 6 stars of the Southern Dipper and the 7 stars of the Northern Dipper. His body was as skinny as an ancient pine tree, his eyes gleaming faintly with a green gleam, and his body was emanating an air of ancientness and vicissitudes. He was none other than Gigazi, the man who left the East Sea with Wu Qi. Gigazi carried a 6-feet-long sword made from the heart of an old peach tree on his back. The edge of the sword was mottled with dark blood-red runes, emanating a profound and mysterious aura. The last man was clad in an iron-gray Taoist robe, the sleeves of which were embroidered with raging flames. His body was emanating a threatening heat, and his face was square and dignified. He was none other than Mod, the man who came with Wu Qi. Mod sat cross-legged on the back of the white crane, with a 6-feet-long iron hammer placed across his knees. The head of the hammer was as big as a winter melon. The 3 cranes were all of the same size, and their cultivation bases were about the same. They were all crane spirits who had formed their gold core. However, the crane that Mod was riding was the slowest, panting heavily. It had a lot to do with the huge hammer in Mod's hand. With the talismans made by Wu Qi himself, which were infused with the primordial violet energy, the 3 of them could hide their auras very well. As a result, their auras were suppressed to the level of peak-level gold immortals, infinitely close to the realm of primordial. Unless those people whom Wu Qi feared the most used their divine sense to forcibly pry into their cultivation bases, no one would be able to find out the actual strength of Wu Qi and his companions. Riding on the white cranes, the 3 of them flew 3,000 miles up into the sky, and then slowly flew toward the east. High up in the sky, the 3 white cranes let out melodious cries as they slowly glided towards the east. Thousands of mountains and rivers swayed under their feet. This was an extremely remote place in the southern region, where one could not see a single soul for 1 trillion miles. Only countless venomous insects and ferocious beasts roamed the mountains, while a 10,000-feet-long serpent coiled around the top of a mountain and breathed out clouds and mists, forming into boundless colorful clouds that harmed all living beings. Sitting on the back of the crane, Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and spread his divine sense in all directions. Everything that was happening around him was under his control. Suddenly, the colorful serpent on the top of the mountain raised its head and took a deep breath. A tremendous suction force trapped the cranes that Wu Qi and his companions were riding and was about to pull them down into its belly. Wu Qi sneered. The sword on his back gave a clear cry and flew out of its scabbard, leaving a 1,000-feet-long beam of white light in the air as it drew an arc in the air and slashed down. The serpent let out a deafening hiss as it was cut into 18 pieces by the sword beam. Blood sprayed out from its body like a fountain. However, the serpent had an extremely tenacious life force. Even with such a severe wound, it could not die immediately. It could only wriggle and twitch on the ground, raising its head and letting out miserable cries. Pointing his finger out, the sword beam that looked like a white dragon flew back into the scabbard on his back. Wu Qi sneered and said, "What a bold, evil creature! How dare you block my path of clouds? You deserve to die." Raising his hand, Wu Qi recited an incantation and performed an incantation gesture. 5 balls of dark, sticky water vapor condensed on his fingers, and along with a deep rumble of thunder, the 5 balls of cold air merged together and compressed into a fist-sized thunderbolt, which slowly fell down to the ground. The thunderbolt landed on the serpent's body. A deep, muffled boom rang out, and the thunderbolt exploded, blasting the serpent's body into pieces. When the blood touched the dark thundercloud released by the thunderbolt, the blood-red light quickly turned dark as well. Amidst a rapid series of explosions, the splashing blood kept exploding in all directions. All the blood of the serpent turned into thunderbolts and exploded, shattering the over 10,000 feet long serpent into pieces, leaving not even a single piece of its flesh behind. A drop of blood, which was blown away by the explosion, fell into a nearby stream with a faint thunderbolt. Immediately, a chain reaction occurred in all the water vapor in the stream, turning them into extremely violent thunderbolts. A series of explosions lingered in the air, and the entire stream, which was over 100 miles long, exploded at the same time. It was as if a violent, black thunderbolt dragon had appeared in the mountains, turning all the rocks and cliffs in the vicinity upside down. Countless boulders were thrown up into the sky, then turned into fine sand by the soft and gentle thunderbolts. At the end of the stream was a deep pool, over 30 miles in diameter. The water in the stream kept exploding and eventually spread into the pool. The originally dark green pool suddenly turned into a despairing black, and the clear water became sticky and cold. A loud boom rang out as the entire pool exploded like a bomb. The rock layers within a radius of 100 miles were all sent flying into the sky. Tens of miles thick rock layers roared up into the sky, but before they could even land on the ground, they were turned into a puff of dust by the soft, explosive force. There were also several small streams that flowed into this deep pool. The explosion had affected these streams and caused them to explode together. All the water was turned into thunderbolts and exploded. Black thunderbolts rampaged in the mountains, destroying everything around them. It was a bolt of lightning that had been casually thrown out in order to kill a giant snake, but in the end, it had destroyed a mountain forest with a circumference of over 2,000 kilometers, killing all living beings in the forest. Only then did the power of the lightning dissipate. On a cloud 100 miles away, a middle-aged man in the robe of the Nine-Dragon Emperor witnessed all this with his own eyes. Riding on the back of a green flood dragon, the man stared blankly at the powerful thunderbolt and asked with a trembling voice, "My dear ministers, this immortal's divine power." A few old men in black priest robes, each with a small 7-storied black pagoda above their heads, stared blankly at Wu Qi and murmured to themselves, "Unfathomably marvelous. A random strike can cause the water element energy to explode continuously. If this happened on a battlefield, if human blood exploded, the water element thunder unleashed by Wu Qi could explode continuously as long as there was water in it. Unless the power of thunder in the initial thunderball was exhausted, the explosion would not stop. If this move was used on a battlefield, as long as the blood in the enemy's body was triggered, it could kill almost all the enemy soldiers in an instant. The middle-aged man sucked in a cold breath and slapped the horn on the flood dragon's head. The flood dragon let out a long cry and sped out of the cloud toward Wu Qi and the others. Facing the strong wind in the sky, the man cried out, "Please wait, senior immortals." This disciple sincerely asks senior immortals to wait. Wu Qi snorted. He casually sprinkled a white cloud to hold up the bodies of the 3 white cranes, then looked back at the man and said with a sneer, "Who are you? How dare you ask Grandpa Dowlord to wait? Tell me who you are or else." A clang rang out, and the sword on Wu Qi's back suddenly jumped 3 inches out of its scabbard. "I'm Wu Tianming, the Emperor of Great Wu," the man said hurriedly. "I sincerely invite senior immortals to come to Great Wu." The few old men in black priest robes hurried to Wu Tianming's side, and they looked at Wu Qi and the others with slight disdain. These old men were all supreme oracles cultivated by the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League. Although they were all fakes, they did not have the self-awareness. They boasted that they were the top existences in the world, and the aura of Wu Qi and his companions was a little weaker than theirs. How could they take them seriously? Although Wu Qi's thunderbolt was amazing and powerful, it was nothing more than that. They were confident that whoever attacked them could easily defeat Wu Qi and his companions. Therefore, they did not think much of Wu Tianming's respectful greeting to Wu Qi and his companions. Wu Qi glanced at the unfriendly faces of the oracles and suddenly sneered. The long sword behind Ji Hao let out a crisp sound, and a white dragon darted up like a sword beam. The 7-storied pagoda above the heads of the 8 oracles was cut in half, then the sword beam swung downwards, and the 8 oracles were neatly cut into 16 pieces. They stared at Wu Qi in horror as their bodies slowly fell apart from the middle, blood sprayed out of their mouths, and the 16 pieces fell to the ground abruptly. Wu Qi looked coldly at Wu Tianming and said in a flat voice, "How dare you? No one has ever dared to glare at me like this." Wu Tianming was not surprised that the oracles who accompanied him were killed. Instead, he was delighted. He dropped to his knees on the cloud and kowtowed to Wu Qi. Senior immortals, disciple Wu Tianming sincerely invites you to come to Great Wu. This disciple is thirsty for talent, and the three immortal masters are like the rain after a long drought. I hope the three immortal masters can consider this disciple's sincerity. Mo Di interrupted Wu Tianming's nonsense and asked in a low, muffled voice, "You want us to work for Great Wu? How much can you give us?" Wu Tianming's eyes suddenly turned as bright as a mouse's. "What do you want?" he cried hastily. "As long as Great Wu has it, we can offer it to you. Immortal masters, please." Gui Guzi waved his hand to interrupt Wu Tianming's chatter. "Lead the way," he said bluntly. Wu Tianming was overjoyed. He looked up at Wu Qi, who nodded noncommittally and retrieved his flying sword with a wave of his hand. Chapter 9:13. Wu Tianming carefully led the way on the flood dragon, turning back and nodding politely to Wu Qi and his companions every 30 to 50 miles. The strong wind was blowing in the sky, and Wu Tianming's nascent soul cultivation base was not even as strong as the heaven-immortal flood dragon he was riding. So, he could not speak at such a high altitude and could only express his goodwill with his actions. Sitting expressionlessly on the back of the white crane, Wu Qi and his companions followed closely behind Wu Tianming. The three of them were communicating with their divine sense. "He seems to be an unlucky emperor." "That's right. He only has 8 oracles with him, and not even a single guard. Looks like he's in dire straits. Could he be an emperor who is just a figurehead? Interesting. It seems that we have to help this emperor fight for power in this trip to Great Wu. It's the same old story. I haven't done this for a long time." The three of them chatted happily while Wu Tianming led the way. After about 4 hours, the group flew out of the mountain range below and a huge river valley appeared in front of them. It was a long and narrow plain between 2 mountains, shaped like a mulberry leaf. The widest part was 4,000 to 5,000 miles, and the length was about 1,000,000 miles. A great river about 100 miles wide rolled and split the valley. Scattered along the river were many cities that had been built not long ago. The soil on Panga continent was extremely fertile, and it took about a month or 2 for the seeds to ripen. In the lands of the villages and towns around the cities, the crops were only a little yellow. Judging by the look of the land, it had not been long since it was planted, and these crops should be the first crop. The first wave of crops had not yet been harvested, and these villages and towns had been built less than 2 months ago. Although they had just arrived, and the people's livelihood had not been properly arranged, 7 or 8 human kingdoms were fighting fiercely on both sides of the river valley. On the borders of these few countries, there were many military towns where armies were stationed. Millions of soldiers surrounded these towns and attacked each other like ants. Murderous auras soared into the sky, and battle cries shook the river and caused waves to surge into the sky. Below them, more than 200,000 people were engaged in a fierce battle on a fertile field. From time to time, there would be soldiers covered in blood falling to the ground, but after a while, the purple aura would wrap around their bodies, and they would jump up again like dragons and tigers to continue fighting the enemy. Unless someone was quick enough to cut off the enemy's head, the enemy would stand up again and continue to fight. After observing for a while, Wu Qi found that although so many soldiers were fighting fiercely, only less than 200 men were killed after nearly an hour. He could not help but shake his head, thinking that the efficiency was too low. How long would it take to decide the outcome of the battle? In the sky above the army, more than a dozen oracles were clearly divided into 2 groups, casting spells at each other. A team of priests was using a spell that Wu Qi was very familiar with to summon meteors from the sky. Small meteors were falling from the sky one after another, fiercely crashing into the opponents. Meanwhile, a team of oracles was using a spell related to ice. Whenever a meteor fell, they would raise their hands and send a thick sheet of blue ice up into the sky. The meteors would make a terrible noise when they collided with the ice. Both sides had similar cultivation bases, so the meteors and ice would easily perish together, resulting in a draw. Wu Qi and the others stopped on the cloud and stared blankly at the 2 teams of oracles clenching their teeth as they fought tenaciously, one attacking and the other defending. They watched for a full 6 hours, until the two teams of oracles ran out of energy at almost the same time. Then, they exchanged a few pleasantries, then turned around and flew back to the barracks in the rear. As the oracles who were fighting each other in the air retreated, the shrill and sonorous sounds of gongs rang out from the two armies on the ground. Amidst the ear-piercing ringing, the two armies stopped fighting at the same time. They healed the wounded and helped the wounded, reorganized their troops, and carried the few who died in the battle. Then, they sang the military song and retreated to the rear of the camp. Wu Qi was speechless at the sight of this for a long time. After a long time, he finally turned to Gigu Zi and asked, "Senior, have you ever seen a battle like this?" Zi rubbed his nose and grinned, then rolled his eyes and looked up at the sky. He did not even have the mood to comment on this great battle. How could he comment on it? It was not even worthy of Gigu Zi's attention at all. Mod was laughing off to the side. Even he could not bear to watch such a battle, let alone Gigu Zi. It was like a gourmet who was used to eating delicacies, but was suddenly served a big bowl of boiled pigweed. How could he be interested in tasting it? Wu Qi smiled and shook his head. Then, he turned to Wu Tianming, who was waiting respectfully in front of him, and said, "Please lead the way, Your Majesty." Wu Tianming smiled respectfully, patted the flood dragon's horn, and quickly led the three of them to a triangular alluvial plain where a tributary of the great river met the main branch in the distance. There were hundreds of cities, countless villages, and towns on the triangular plain that measured more than 50,000 miles in circumference. Wu Qi scanned the plain with his divine sense. Wu Tianming's great Wu dynasty was considered a powerful dynasty, with a population of more than 3 billion people. Compared with the other kingdoms in this valley, the total population of Great Wu was far greater. The smallest kingdom had a population of just over 200 million, less than a fraction of Great Wu's. But the whole territory of Great Wu was shrouded in a gloomy atmosphere, and the soldiers in the military towns along the border were listless. There was no morale at all. "There's something wrong with this kingdom." Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and smiled. This was the kind of kingdom he was looking for. Otherwise, how could he take advantage of it? The group of people quickly flew towards the top of the triangle of the alluvial plain. There was a large city with a population of more than 2 million. The city walls, which were over 100 feet high, were entirely made of pure white glittering marble, with a large number of runes and restrictive spells drawn on them using black materials. The sharp contrast of black and white gave the city a mysterious and majestic aura. The streets in the city were well planned, and the neighborhoods were arranged like a chessboard. The city was covered with shady trees, clean and comfortable. It was a very good city. As soon as Wu Tianming's flood dragon flew over the city, a thunderclap rang out, and a green-scaled wildebeest roared furiously as it stepped on 4 flaming clouds and soared into the sky, charging straight at Wu Tianming. An old man clad in golden heavy armor, majestic and full of killing intent, rode on the back of a wildebeest. He shouted sternly from far away from Wu Tianming, "Where did His Majesty go? Didn't I tell His Majesty that the war is not in Great Wu's favor, and that His Majesty can't leave the palace?" The old man had a square, dark face that looked no different from the bottom of a pot. He had a pair of broom-like eyebrows, a pair of triangular eyes, and a large catfish mouth. He looked like a ferocious man, not a kind and dutiful citizen. Wu Qi glanced at the old man with his divine sense. Yes, he was practicing another body-tempering cultivation technique of the human race, the 9 rotations indestructible body. Compared with the true body of heaven and earth scripture, which had a higher degree of balance, it was an extreme cultivation technique that focused on defense, absolute strength, and strong vitality. Those who practiced it were the most troublesome on the battlefield. Their fortress-like combat prowess often required several people of the same cultivation base to suppress them. Moreover, the old man's 9 rotations indestructible body had reached the level of the 9 stars realm of the second Panga heaven, which was equivalent to the strength of a first-tier gold immortal. Compared to Wu Tianming's pathetic cultivation base of the nascent soul realm, the old man could kill 1,000,000 Wu Tianming with a casual slap. Seeing this old man, Wu Tianming shivered subconsciously. He pushed his hands against the flood dragon's back and slid his buttocks along the flood dragon's back for 20 to 30 feet. He stammered and smiled dryly at the old man. "Uncle, you. The old man rode straight to Wu Tianming's side and casually slapped the flood dragon on the head with his palm. The flood dragon howled miserably as its water tank-sized head was smashed to pieces. Blood sprayed the old man's face, and the flood dragon's huge, heavy body fell to the ground. Wu Tianming stood on a thin cloud, trembling with fear. He did not even have the courage to look at the old man. The old man sneered and scolded in a low voice. "What an ungrateful beast! How dare he follow you out of the palace without permission? You deserve to die." He glanced to the left and right of Wu Tianming, but did not see the 8 oracles killed by Wu Qi. He could not help but roar furiously, "Where are His Majesty's 8 personal guards? Where are they? These damn things, where did they go?" Wu Qi cleared his throat and slowly rose to his feet. A purple cloud under his feet dragged him to Wu Tianming's side. He stared at the furious old man and said coolly, "Those 8 good-for-nothings? They are dead, killed by Grandpa Daolord." The furious old man suddenly quieted down. He squinted at Wu Qi for a moment, then asked cautiously, "May I ask who you are, Senior Immortal?" Wu Qi patted the hilt of the sword on his shoulder and said coldly and proudly, "I'm Daolord 7 Killing." Zi's face darkened as he grunted weakly, "I'm Daolord Greed." With a stiff face, Emodi rolled his eyes and said with a cold snort, "I'm Daolord Vanquisher." As he said this, his face blushed imperceptibly. He felt a little ashamed. How old was he? How could he agree to let Wu Qi come out with him to fool people? After plagiarizing the names of the 3 celestial lords without any psychological burden, Wu Qi snorted coldly at the stunned old man and said, "You can ask His Majesty who we are." Wu Tianming's eyes lit up. He hurriedly smiled and said, "Uncle, these are the imperial advisors that I've specially hired for Great Wu Dynasty. I've seen them with my own eyes. They have profound magic power and great divine abilities. With the addition of the 3 imperial advisors, Great Wu Dynasty will have no worries on Panga continent." The old man was stunned. Subconsciously he roared, "Imperial advisors? Who gave you the right to hire these 3 wild Taoists as imperial advisors? I, Wu Dihao, am the regent of Great Wu, and I'm in charge of all the state affairs. How dare His Majesty hire these 3 wild Taoists?" He suddenly spoke, and his cold voice made Wu Dihao shut his mouth. "You're just a regent, so you should know your duty. You're just a king, and His Majesty is the Emperor of Great Wu. How dare you offend your superior and throw Great Wu's imperial order into chaos? Could it be that the Prince Regent has the intention to be a rebel who plans to seize the throne?" Wu Dihao's words were like a big black pot being pinned on his head. Chapter 9:14. With just a few words, Gigu Zi had rendered Wu Dihao speechless. What kind of person was Gigu Zi? Both of his disciples could stir up a storm in the warring states period with their glib tongues, and as their master, Zi was even better at it. Wu Dihao was just a powerful minister of Great Wu, so how could he be Gigu Zi's match in terms of logic? Wu Dihao, flushed with anger, stared blankly at Gigu Zi for a long time, and finally managed to force out a few words. "How can Your Majesty alone decide on the matter of hiring the imperial advisor? It has to be discussed in the court by all the civil and military officials." Wu Qi chuckled, then shook his head and said, "What the Prince Regent said makes sense." Wu Dihao gave Wu Qi a suspicious look. It was clear that he and these 3 Taoists were rivals now, so why did they agree with him? Frankly speaking, with Wu Dihao's current control over the court of Great Yu, none of Wu Tianming's decisions would pass if they were discussed in the court. Wu Tianming seemed to have thought of this as well. He looked at Wu Qi with a little helplessness and anger. Wu Qi just nodded with a relaxed smile and said, "Your Majesty, we'd better convene the civil and military officials of Great Wu to discuss this matter. Everything has to be done in a legitimate way." When he said the word, justified, Wu Qi deliberately stared at Wu Dihao and emphasized the word. Wu Dihao's reaction was as Wu Qi had expected. His dark face turned purple, and his eyes bulged as if he was about to draw a knife and kill someone. This man was indeed a man of martial arts who could not keep anything in his heart. Although he could run amok for a while by relying on his power, he was bound to suffer in the end. With a smile, Wu Qi turned around and returned to the back of the white crane. Wu Tianming took a deep breath, mustered up the courage to look at Wu Dihao, and threw out a palm-sized gold medal. Not long after, the loud and clear sound of a golden bell rang out from the magnificent palaces in the city. Everyone looked down from above and saw that the main doors of the houses in the streets near the palaces were opened. Hundreds of carriages and horses, escorted by a large group of guards, rolled out and quickly headed for the main gate of the imperial palace. He shook his head slightly. After all, Great Wu Dynasty was a small kingdom from an outer heavenly realm, and the atmosphere in the imperial court alone could not compare with that of Diyu. When Diyu was not divided and had not gone through two major upheavals, there were more than 300,000 courtiers from different clans in Yuxiong Palace. Great Wu, on the other hand, had only 200 or 300 courtiers in the palace, which was a huge gap between them and Diyu. Seeing that the courtiers had entered the palace, Wu Qi and his companions disembarked from the cloud and landed straight inside the palace. A group of eunuchs and palace maids came up to them and escorted Wu Tianming into a great hall, where he had to take a bath, change his clothes, and change into the dragon robe for the imperial court. It took him almost an hour to get ready. Wu Qi, Gui Guzi, and Mod were waiting outside the hall with Wu Dihao. Giguzi and Mod were resting with their eyes closed and did not pay any attention to Wu Dihao, while Wu Qi and Wu Dihao stared at each other with great interest. Wu Dihao was extremely angry, and his eyes were as sharp as knives, full of a threatening aura. Wu Qi stared back at him without showing any sign of weakness. His sharp eyes swept back and forth across Wu Dihao's vital parts, and the subtle look in his eyes made Wu Dihao uncomfortable. Before long, Wu Dihao's anger was greatly diminished by Wu Qi's gaze, and he even turned his head away timidly, not daring to meet Wu Qi's eyes again. Wu Qi deliberately laughed dryly. When Wu Dihao heard the laughter, he turned his head angrily and glared at Wu Qi again. But Wu Qi's eyes suddenly became extremely evil. His eyes turned pitch black, and his deep pupils were spinning slowly like whirlpools. Wu Dihao's eyes were attracted by Wu Qi's, and his soul trembled as he was almost sucked into the whirlpools in Wu Qi's eyes. Wu Dihao, who was scared out of his wits, screamed and jumped back in a panic. His soul trembled in his spiritual ocean as if it was about to fly out of his body. Hastily, Wu Dihao pulled out 2 bone talismans from under his sleeve and smashed them with his palm. The talismans, which could freeze souls and ward off evil spirits and eliminate disasters, flashed with a bright light and imprinted themselves on his forehead. Only then did his restless soul calm down. Drenched in sweat, Wu Dihao pointed at Wu Qi angrily and wanted to scold him, but it was only when the curses were already on the tip of his tongue that he suddenly realized that Wu Qi was no longer one of his henchmen in Great Wu who could be beaten and scolded at will. The terrible feeling that his soul was almost sucked away by an external force had brought him to the brink of death. He did not even dare to look Wu Qi in the eye, let alone scold Wu Qi. Suppressing the horror in his heart, Wu Dihao bowed his head and rolled his eyes desperately. Wu Tianming's sudden recruitment of Wu Qi and his 2 companions had a great impact on Wu Dihao's power in Great Wu. But how could he react? Wu Dihao rummaged through the little brain in his head in distress, but he could not come up with any good ideas. After pondering for a long time, Wu Dihao could not help but look in the direction of the imperial court hall. His henchmen were waiting in the hall, and there were a few clever ones among them. Perhaps they could come up with some good ideas for him. Wu Tianming, who had bathed and changed his clothes, strode out of the hall surrounded by eunuchs and palace maids. A few little eunuchs came over with a chariot of 9 dragons pulled by a green deer, and they helped Wu Tianming board the chariot and sit down. Wu Tianming turned his head and beckoned to Wu Qi and his companions with a smile. "How about you ride with me, imperial advisors?" Wu Dihao's face flickered. Wu Qi cupped his fist and said with a chuckle, There's a difference between a ruler and a subject. Please go ahead, Your Majesty. Wu Tianming paused. He gave Wu Dihao a meaningful look, whose face was unsightly, then nodded slowly and said, "You're right, Imperial Advisor." Waving his hand, an old eunuch shouted at the top of his voice, and the group of people went straight to the front hall. In the Great Hall of Great Wu's court, the princes, courtiers, and officials who were qualified to attend the meeting were divided into a dozen small groups, discussing in low voices why Wu Tianming had summoned the courtiers today. Great Wu usually held a court meeting every 3 days, and usually, the regent, Wu Dihao, made the decision directly in the Prime Minister's office, so it had nothing to do with Wu Tianming. Today was not the day of the court meeting, so what had happened when Wu Tianming, who was usually a mere figurehead, summoned the courtiers for a meeting? The shrill cries of the eunuchs reminded the courtiers that Wu Tianming had arrived. The courtiers slowly returned to their seats a little lazily. When Wu Tianming sat down on the throne, more than 70% of them glanced at Wu Dihao at the same time, then fell to their knees and kowtowed to Wu Tianming, exclaiming, "Long live Wu Dihao." Wu Qi and his companions stood next to Wu Tianming, while Wu Dihao snorted coldly, walked down the jade platform where the throne was, and stood slowly at the head of the courtiers. Before Wu Tianming could speak, Wu Dihao waved his hand and said, "Rise, my subjects." Today, His Majesty has summoned all the courtiers for a meeting because he has found 3 imperial advisors for Great Wu. Are you all going to discuss this matter? Imperial advisors? Great Wu's courtiers looked up in confusion. Standing next to Wu Tianming, Wu Qi and his companions were very eye-catching. It was only then that they noticed how unsightly Wu Dihao's face was. Just over a month ago, when Wu Tianming's father, Wu Dihao's brother, and the former emperor of Great Wu were killed, he did not look as unsightly as he did today. All kinds of thoughts tumbled in the minds of the courtiers. Great Wu's former emperor had died suddenly only 3 days after Great Wu's arrival on Pangu continent. It happened so suddenly that none of the courtiers had time to react. After that, Wu Dihao made the decision and selected Wu Tianming, the weakest and the least famous among the princes, to ascend the throne. Less than a month after the new emperor ascended the throne, Wu Dihao had completely overthrown Wu Tianming, and all the power of the court was in his hands. Now, Wu Tianming had suddenly found 3 imperial advisors. The mystery behind it was worth investigating. There was a moment of silence in the great hall, and then an old man, who looked like he could die at any moment, slowly walked out of the ranks. With a trembling voice, he asked, "May I ask why you are qualified to be Great Wu's imperial advisors? May I ask why you are qualified to be Great Wu's imperial advisors?" asked Chi-Chi, who was full of courtiers. Wu Tianming's face turned dark in an instant, and all the courtiers were of one mind. Wu Dihao, on the other hand, suddenly regained his vigor. He puffed out his chest and looked triumphantly at the courtiers, feeling proud and elated. Wu Qi took a slow step forward and said lightly, "Among the 3 of us, I'm Qisha. I'm proficient in combat, and no one can stop me when I charge into the enemy's formation. My senior brother, Taoist Greed, is proficient in astronomy, geography, astrology, divination, and the ghosts and deities of heaven and earth. He is also proficient in agriculture, fishing, herding, and commerce. As for my second senior brother, Taoist Vanquisher, he is proficient in the art of artifact refinement and alchemy. The weapons he refines are all divine weapons, and the spirit pills he refines." With a chuckle, Wu Qi took out one of the spirit pills he had refined from the Buddha of Joy and slowly presented it to Wu Tianming. "Your Majesty, this is the 9 transformations pill refined by my second senior brother. It can make people ascend to immortality. I wonder if Your Majesty would like to try it?" Wu Tianming's action took everyone in the hall by surprise. Without waiting for Wu Dihao to speak or the court officials to object, he grabbed the spirit pill from Wu Qi's hand and swallowed it down. Even Wu Qi was taken aback by the emperor's sudden movement. He wondered if the emperor was driven into a corner and was about to jump over the wall. Otherwise, how would he dare to do such a desperate thing? Fortunately, the spirit pill Wu Qi gave him was not poison, but a real supreme spirit pill. As soon as Wu Tianming swallowed the pill, every single pore on his body began to emit extremely fine golden light. The golden light gradually gathered into a dense golden glow, wrapping around his body. Meanwhile, large amounts of sticky black impurities rushed out of his body. Golden light rose from the ground, and a faint aroma wafted out from Wu Tianming's body. Wu Tianming's body trembled. Abruptly, he opened his mouth and sprayed out 3 purple golden lotuses. Instantly, the grand hall was filled with a strange aroma, and flowers were falling from the sky. Powerful energy waves surged out from his body, forcing all the ministers in the grand hall to lose their balance. Not only did the 9 transformations pill contain 1/10 of the energy essence purified by a Buddha of joy, but Wu Qi had also copied and branded a copy of his attainment with a method he had learned in his previous life. Wu Tianming's magic power cultivation base broke through from the realm of nascent soul to the realm of 18th tier gold immortal, and then an enormous amount of energy essence was stored in his body. He looked up at the sky in a trance. It was the Buddha's attainment merging with his relatively fragile nascent divinity. Wu Qi cleared his throat and said indifferently, "The 9 transformations pill can make people ascend to immortality." Glancing at the stunned courtiers in the hall, Wu Qi asked softly, "May I ask if my senior brother and I are qualified to be Great Wu's imperial advisor?" You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.